the internal election. That's due for April 27th and 28th. The PNM in the rebuilding phase. Clearly, it could be said so based off of the fact that they are having internal elections, but everything has been kept quiet. Not much has been said. We'll get into that conversation later on, but first, let me welcome my guest in studio. You know him very well from his appearances on AM Prime previously and his commentary. I welcome back Chris Hossain. Chris, welcome back to AM Prime.
Thank you for having me this morning. Good morning.
You look a little blue. Why do you look blue?
We both. This was not planned, but yeah. So thank you for having me back on this morning. I know today is a Friday morning, so I'm excited to get into this conversation and to continue it, of course, with you.
Well, I'm glad for that. Today's a Friday morning. I look forward to when work ends.
So people are more so winding down, and you know they turn on their televisions. It's around 6 a.m. this morning, and this is such a heavy conversation. So I'm excited to see how we discuss it, approach it.
Certainly. Well, later on we will be joined hopefully by former THA Youth Assemblyman Ajay Lane as well to contribute to the conversation. But this issue of constitutional reform, and I say it's an issue because it's all well and good that we have a constitutional committee. We also have an advisory committee, and I should be very, very specific because it's an advisory committee as compared to previous committees. In 1976, Sir Hugh Wooding, I believe, was charged with actually writing the constitution. And then you had the High Tally Committee as well. And the last efforts were actually in 2009 under former Prime Minister Patrick Manning. Unfortunately, that came to a grinding halt when he called a snap election, and we know what happened since then. Now, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, he's campaigned on constitutional reform previously. Two of the things that he's really campaigned on is constitutional reform as well as digitalization. Those are two major things he's campaigned on. I've heard, from what I understand, we've made some good, positive inroads with respect to digitalizing our society. But now, a year before a general election, this advisory committee is put into place. I'm not saying that is anything bad, but given our history, and given the last time constitutional reform was taken seriously, look what happened. That being said, what are your general thoughts on this committee being formed and thus far their meetings with the public?
So, constitutional reform is something that Trinidad and Tobago citizens have been engaged in over the past couple of years. It has always been a conversation at the forefront of our political discussions, but we're still at the conversation stage. In 2009, indeed, former Prime Minister Manning would have also started the conversation there. I believe Mrs. Prasad Bisessa as well, during her tenure as Prime Minister.
In 2013.
Correct. But unfortunately, we have not seen any sort of delivery in that. And so for Dr. Rowley and the PNM, the current PNM, to seek an election or a mandate by using constitutional reform and not delivering and coming a couple months before an election is due. Yes, a year, but still, what can you really get done? Because, I mean, it's beyond the consultation process. We're also looking at this has to be passed according to the standing orders of the House in terms of the majority. And so you have to get the buy-in of not just the opposition, but the independent bench. So I don't think it can be done in 1 year. And I don't think that the PNM will suggest that they're going to, or their intention is for it to be done in 1 year. But I do think that they would have, this is their second term. And so I think it's a bit sloppy to now bring this to the population a year before your election. I think it's very sloppy.
And at the same time, there will be those who disagree with you. They would simply say, why are we saying it's sloppy? Why are we disagreeing? This is something we've been calling for such a long time. At least there is a Prime Minister now who's actually put a committee into place, and we're actually seeing consultations with the public taking place.
Yeah, well, when Mrs. Prasad Bisessa, she had a constitutional majority when she would have led the People's Partnership government. And because I would assume one of the reasons why the population decided not to go with her and her government in 2015 would have been maybe perhaps because she didn't deliver in that particular aspect constitutional reform. And so similarly here, I think that is an issue that may be something that the PNM may have to defend when it comes to their platform meetings for the general election time, because I see this as a election, what you call it, a football, a political football.
Yes, that's the reference, yeah.
And so I want to caution our politicians that we are not gullible citizens. And this is not just for the sitting government, this is also for the opposition. That because Mrs. Prasad Visesa, and I know we will get into maybe the CCJ matter as well, because that too is a discussion within constitutional reform. And so we need to be cautious in how we speak to Trinbagonians and what our positions are. I guess it's better late than never, but of course this is your second term. So,
Chris, do you suppose that you're taking too much of a pessimistic approach to this situation?
Oh, no. I think we're taking a realistic approach to the situation, because when I looked at the last local government election, which is a litmus test for your general election, the voter turnout would have been 30.34%. And that tells me that the population, we're a bit tired, we're a bit frustrated. But the committee is not a bad committee, you know. I just think that the timing is very off in your second term. But I do welcome the committee, and I also welcome the conversations that are to follow. And I want to encourage Trinidad and Tobago to engage in these consultations, because there are a number of discussions that we ought to have. For example, term limitations for prime ministers. I think that is very important. Election dates. Let us have set general election dates. I think this idea that the sitting government has that election date in their back pocket is not a good practice.
Yes, well, we only are aware of it about 3 months before the election is
correct.
Due, yeah.
We should have the right to recall our MPs. I know that we have, in terms of the Electoral College, they have the right to recall the president through their mechanisms and how they vote. And if they, I know there's an Electoral College, and there's something like that happened recently. I believe it was the tribunal, the potential of the tribunal being set up. There was a couple months ago, maybe a year or two ago, with the Police Service Commission debacle. But I digress. But we should also have that right, because for far too long, members of Parliament in Trinidad and Tobago has taken their role you know what? They have taken Trinbagonians as though we are gullible as well. And so they must deliver, whether in government or opposition. Not because you sit down in opposition means that you are not going to not just advocate for your constituents, but you have to consult with us.
Let me step on some toes here for a moment, and I will try to be as respectful as possible. And the reason why I say this is because I'm looking at things from an all-rounded perspective. Do you think politicians really care about what you're seeing, in the sense that all that matters to them is that 30% that they can get to come out and vote? Because remember, our system is first past the post. We don't have proportional representation.
Which is a conversation.
Which is another conversation, of course. But bearing in mind that, they don't necessarily care about what you're saying. They just care about that 30% coming out and voting and ensuring that they get over the line somehow or the other. So are we giving too much credit in seeing that we shouldn't allow politicians to think we're gullible or hoodwinked?
I think we have certain leaders in this country that are on their way out politically. And so the decisions that they make today will not affect them in the next 10 to 20 years. It will affect...
You think that? Do they think that as well?
Well, I'm telling you, it will affect the millennials, it will affect Generation Z and the generations after Generation Z. And what we must do as citizens in this country, I am not suggesting that we protest for everything, but there are built-in mechanisms in which we can advocate. And so I view this country as a two-party system. And I've always told the young persons, join, take up space and advocate. Take up space and advocate with purpose. And do not practice the old politics that have gotten us nowhere in this country. And so I'm still hopeful I am still very hopeful. And whether they care or they don't care, I mean, that is a decision they will not just have to live with, but the electorate will make their decision come next year. And additionally, I mean, you're looking at several third parties in this country. I don't think there has ever been a time, I don't know if you could recall, when there would have been so many third parties in Trinidad and Tobago. I don't know. And I think, you know,
probably not as many.
Not as many.
But when, you know, prior to the formation of the NAR.
Correct.
Yeah.
But we have I think, two major political parties who have, I think, gone through many iterations and proven themselves in terms of their political agenda to a certain extent, underperformed to a certain extent, of course. But what persons are looking for is a political home. What is the purpose of a political party? Well, yes, a political party is an organized group of persons with common goals, objectives, policies, but most important, to get into government. And so persons in this country right now, it's very clear that we do not really see that with what we have before us. And I don't think that it is mainly the PNM or the UNC. I think it's a matter of leadership. I think the conversation is leadership.
Wouldn't proportional representation to a certain extent correct that? I mean, the first past the post system has allowed for this two-party state that we often speak about. But proportional representation would allow for these third parties. And arguably these third parties do have a good level of support. They do have a good base. Wouldn't proportional representation correct this two-party system?
I think it would correct the two-party system, but I do think we need to have a better discussion. I wish to see a debate inside Parliament and outside Parliament. And when I say outside Parliament, I mean amongst the citizens. And we have different platforms in which we can advocate. But proportional representation, and I think there is a con to it, or I would say a disadvantage, and we would have seen this in 2011 in Guyana, when there would have been a hung parliament because the opposition party and the third party would have formed the majority over the government. So you had an issue there. So I think it's a conversation that we ought to continue having, but in a meaningful way. And I wish to see our politicians really engage in it. I mean, you and I are having this conversation, yes, but I am to yet hear anything beyond, well, we want proportional representation. You mean, explain that to the citizens. What does that mean, and how will it affect us? And I think it will come, however, from the persons within their political organizations, their membership, who ought to clamor for the policies that they wish to see their party drive.
I think there will be a stance against proportional representation, because you just mentioned the example of Guyana with the hung parliament in 2011, and I think the most recent example that I could recall of a hung parliament or a near-hung parliament was in Israel when Benjamin Netanyahu went back up for elections. And the reason why I say there would be a stance against it is because it doesn't necessarily work out in any one party's favor. Right now, this two-party system that is in place because of first past the post benefits both the United National Congress and the People's National Movement. It doesn't benefit third parties.
Well, I have heard the UNC speak to proportional representation, and so I assume and I anticipate that they may support something like that. But you're right. It may also, they may also not benefit from it. And the proof is in 2000 and I believe 7 with the COP. I think the COP got over 100,000 something votes. Didn't get a seat, but got a lot of votes. So yeah, I want to see this conversation be fleshed out.
A good example of that as well is, was it 2011, 2012, when Herbert Volney resigned as MP.
Correct.
For St. Joseph.
St. Joseph.
You had the COP going up, you had the PNM going up. This was in 2011, this was prior to the election. But there was a split. And PNM won simply because of the divide between the two opposition parties at that time. So that's another example that you can look at as well. But you're saying that you think the United National Congress might speak about this?
Well, I assume so, but it comes down to leadership. I've always asked myself, and I think I've also spoken about this on the show before, why hasn't the opposition been able to coalesce all opposition forces? And I think that's a question we need to sit and think about.
Well, that is something we can certainly debate, but the reason why I've brought up you seeing that the opposition might speak about proportional representation is because the other issues, the CCG, of which the opposition seems to have taken a stand against, of which they previously supported.
Correct.
So you never know whether this is going to swing.
Yeah.
You never know. But I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break here on the program. When we return, what we're going to do is that we're going to break down just a couple of points made by Chris this morning, as well as points that were also reflected during these public consultation meetings by the Constitutional Advisory Committee, what citizens have said so far. And one of the major talking points is term limits, as well as the CCG. So let's take a break here on AM Prime, and when we return, we'll continue that conversation.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God, so we kind of at a stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's been the victim,
Right.
or the man has been the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI, worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
Folks, we're back and better than ever.
Your show have always appeared to be a show that is focused on going to the cause or looking to the cause.
We hardly ever talk about the white-collar crime, though. We always talk about the ones that involve more as physical violence against individuals.
The citizens will only measure transmission when water starts to flow through their taps.
The Constitution doesn't talk about local election.
Contract mafia that's responsible for looting the country and they own and operate these politicians.
So if you are running a country and you can't say nothing as a prime minister, please take up your bag and go.
It is not comparative to the murder figures, but it is in fact very high.
I believe he's protecting certain individuals.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and, I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Welcome back to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen. Chris Hussain and I now joined by Mr. Ajay Lane out in Tobago. Good morning, Ajay, and welcome back to AM Prime.
Hi, good morning, good morning. Nice to be back with you guys again.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us. So the discussion thus far, we've touched on constitutional reform and the fact that an advisory committee was established earlier this year, just 1 year though before general elections to be called. Now, there are pros and cons, we can debate that. But Ajay, the workings of the advisory committee to put forward recommendations to the cabinet, and given the history of constitutional reform here in Trinidad and Tobago, are you satisfied or pleased with the approach that the Prime Minister has taken with the formation of this committee, as well as the approach that the committee has taken thus far?
Well, I think if we had to look at the track record we would have seen over the years with this Prime Minister and committees and reports, I think it's fair for the population to believe that it's just another election ploy, even though it could be a serious measure, because some of the members of that committee are persons who have pretty good track records, and some of them in the Tobago space are kind of questionable. So it's a kind of catch-21 scenario in terms of we are hoping for the best, but I think as a population, we need to also prepare for the worst.
Now, why are we saying prepare for the worst? Okay, I get the historical aspect. I understand that. I myself have raised that point. But gentlemen, at the same time, something is actually being done. Now, that's one thing. I get what Ajay is saying in respect to reports and how they sit on desks and how they gather dust. I totally understand that. But on the flip side, thus far, the reports coming in suggest, even from Dr. Terence Farrell, who I interviewed on this program, he says thus far we've had good participation from the public. So the public seems to be, or a portion of the public seems to be very much intrigued and wanting to see this happen.
Well, I think, because Ajay and I shared almost a similar view, almost the exact same view. I think it is not that we are against the committee. This is good. We want to have conversations like this in the country. But of course, that when you would have sought your mandate from the population in an election, you campaigned on constitutional reform. That's what you campaigned on. In your second term, a year before your office tenure, is up, is expired. You now come to have this conversation that you told us, vote for me for this, and you now come in to discuss this.
So therefore, arguably, 3 months given to the Commission is not enough.
It is not enough. It is not enough, no.
Ajay, your thoughts?
I want to agree with Chrissy. I don't believe 3 months is enough for the amount of changes that I think is needed to the Constitution. And we saw happening here in the Tobago space a couple of years ago, where we voted thinking that international government would have progressed a little bit. And we saw this a couple year and a half out from our election. We now see where this current administration is heading in halfway through their second term in office. And what progress can we see have happened? I mean, I personally sent in recommendations to the Parliament concerning that same Tobago International Government Bill, and I haven't received a thank you for contributing email. So it's like we want the progress, we are in favor of it, but it's hard to believe an administration or a Prime Minister who makes these types of statements and promises and doesn't deliver. It's the same thing we see in the local government reform. So you would hear all about it, you'll have teams working, but you're not getting up-to-date reports. We are not seeing progress reports going public. So how are we to actually believe that something is happening when you have persons saying, yes, the public responded, yes, it's looking good, but we're not seeing the actual document or paperwork or television interviews, so where you can actually see what's happening. Like with the town hall meetings that we're seeing now. We could say something is happening, yes, because the gentleman made a statement concerning the property tax at a town hall meeting, I think in San Fernando. And then we could have seen where the Minister of Finance went back to review the document. It went back to Parliament. We may not be totally satisfied, but you saw something happening. So I think that is the approach we need to change with this Constitutional Reform Committee. We need to actually see something happening. We need to see physical documents with some of the contributions of members of the public for us to say that, yes, it's working.
I'll tell you, gentlemen, one of my major concerns is the fact that the committee makes recommendations to Cabinet. And my concern is whether or not Cabinet will then have the power to accept or reject whatever recommendations are put forward. And if that is the case, would what is adopted be a reflection of what society wants or what the government of the day wants? That is one of my major concerns with any recommendations being made to Cabinet. The second part is impartiality. I mean, we are already aware, the Trinidad and Tobago society is very skeptical, and they have every right to be given. Historically, impartiality is something that is just a word we use freely. But even in respect to people who are a part of the committee, whether or not impartiality applies there, we are aware that Brenda Sinan is a former Speaker of the House under Patrick Manning. I'm not in any way suggesting that there is not going to be impartiality, but I also have question marks surrounding, because of historically what we have. I was about to say another call a journalist name, but Heman Ransing. Actually, Heman Ransing, if I'm not mistaken, is married to Colin Kangaloo, who's Christine Kangaloo's brother. And this is why I'm speaking about impartiality as well. But more so, whether or not Cabinet will have the right to alter or reject any of the recommendations put forward by the advisory committee.
The government has been very, I think, they may get a bad grade for their communications, right? And as a journalist, I'm sure that you may have your own opinion on that. I don't mean to bring you into the conversation as well. But again, I think it's also very early in this stage to comment. But of course, we must comment. But I do think that they need to work on their communication with Trinidad and Tobago. As it pertains to impartiality, the opposition, I hope, can hold the government to account as it relates to this in a meaningful way and be effective. And I look on and I hope for the best, because that is the job of the opposition, to hold the government to account. So,
well, Jimmy, Chris, let's start breaking down three of the major points raised so far in these consultations with the public. they've spoken of term limits. And when we say term limits, not the ones that already exist where term is equal to 5 years. We meant the amount of terms total that a Prime Minister can sit. You've also raised another issue this morning of which the late and great Reginald Dumas also pointed out. He says the right to recall MPs. He's in favour of constitutional reform, especially the right to recall dysfunctional members of Parliament. And then the major one as well, within recent times, the CCJ, and whether or not TNT needs to adopt the CCJ as our final court of appeal. But let's start, of course, with term limits. Ajay, there have been expressions of term limits to be reduced from 5 years to 4 years, and even limiting the total number of terms to 2 in total for a Prime Minister. Any thoughts with respect to this suggestion that has been expressed publicly by members who have participated in these public consultations?
Well, I'm in support of that. I believe term limit, particularly 5-year term limit, is good for the country, it's good for progress. It also would now create leaders in political organizations that have to lead. You'd always lead. Yes, so you'd always have to lead now, knowing that you won't be there forever. So you would not become a career politician per se. You go in, you serve, do what you can do, and you also have to be prepared for transition. I think it will augur better for the society. We would see a lot more progress because you would now know you only have one 5-year term limit. And you need to get what you need to get done within that 5-year period. I'm fully in support of that. It's something I have been personally saying for a very long time. But probably because I'm not as outspoken as I should have been, people probably didn't hear me. But I'm fully in support of that term limit.
I'm also in support of the term limit. You know, I think it was Franklin Roosevelt, when he would have served, I believe, his 4th term as the president of the U.S., former president. And he became very complacent in office, and one of the criticisms that he would have faced was he was a bit lazy to some. And so similarly here, we can find ourselves in this country where persons or prime ministers, and I cast no aspersions to sitting or past prime ministers, but they can become complacent, they can become lazy, they can become drunkard with power, they can become dictators. They can also occupy space in a way that there's nothing more that they can give the country beyond old talk. And so I definitely think putting a check and balance will also allow for succession planning. So when we hear about agendas like Vision 2020, Vision 2030, it can be really realized in a good manner.
But gentlemen, Chris, let me start with you. Define the term limit. What would you see as a most ideal term limit for a Prime Minister?
I think a fair term limit, when we look around the world, because last night, and I apologize, I don't have the figures before me, but what I would have seen generally in terms of term limits would have been 2 terms. 2 consecutive terms, and that's what I found. And I think that's more reasonable, because the reality is, and let's be very fair in Trinidad and Tobago, whoever becomes the Prime Minister, 5 years is not enough. I don't think 5 years is enough.
I agree with you.
I don't think, because if you're really serious about governance and taking this country forward, and we have conversations, I've said before, renewable energy, AI and the impact on the labor force, all of these digitization, the digital cash, all of these different things. We have different niche markets, etc. You cannot get everything done in 5 years. You cannot. So I do think that 2 terms, I think that is a good start. That is a good start.
2 5-year terms.
2 5-year terms. That's a good start. But of course, I want to hear what other citizens in Trinidad and Tobago have to say. Maybe they may think 1.
Ajay, your thought, because I think in the Philippines, if I'm not mistaken, as an example, it's 1 7-year term.
I might even go further, that And not only constitutional reform in terms of Trinidad and Tobago's constitution for term limits, but I think these political parties need to look at constitutional reform for their party constitutions as it relates to term limits for political leaders.
If the constitution within the party actually exists or is adhered to.
Well,
Ajay, your thoughts on what would you define as a term limit? I mean, Chris has suggested 2 5-year terms. What are your thoughts on term limits?
Yeah, I would have wanted to agree, but also when we think from a continuation or a continual standpoint, if the population decided to give a functioning prime minister a 3rd term, I don't think it should be a problem, but the process for that individual getting a 3rd term is something I think the population should decide. So let's say, yes, he could read for the 2 5-year term normal. But if for some reason the population decides that this prime minister or individual has been functional, whether it be via referendum or some system where the population decide, I don't mind giving an additional 3rd term based on the performance. But I think we could set it at 2 for any regular individual. But if the population decides for a 3rd, whether it be somebody move a petition to have a referendum done on the said minister or the said prime minister, no problem. Because if the country is progressing and this prime minister is functional and is doing well for his previous 2 terms, I don't think we should cut it short and bring the progress to an abrupt halt. Because usually once we see a change in the political space, or you have a new political leader, they tend to cancel or downplay a lot of the progress made by the previous administration. And I don't think that's wise as a country.
Well, I agree in the aspect that 1 5-year term is not enough for any prime minister, especially if they are serious about making changes and major changes. It's not going to happen in 5 years. 2 years is something that could be explored, but Angie raises a very pertinent point, and that is what happens if a population then decides, hold up, this gentleman is or this lady is doing well for us. You know, they're leading the charge. We're heading in a direction that we see fit and positive for the future. We want this individual to continue their leadership. That's one point that you have to look at, because we might be basing term limits here in TNT off of our historical, experiences. And the simple part of that is we want term limits because after 1 term, even after 2 terms, we get fed up, we get tired. It's the same old thing. There's no performance. And then Ajay pointed out progress. What would you define as progress? Because what you may see as progress for TNT, I might not see as progress for TNT.
Well, of course, this is a conversation that we have to flush out more. We need to discuss it more. But I think if we're making a decision like this, when we do reform the Constitution, let's just say, you can also amend it. There are governments and parliamentarians that will come in the future, and they too can revisit and reform as they see fit and start another process if they think it is needed. Well, not if they, but if the country thinks that it is needed. But we have to make our decisions based on what we know and what the political culture has been like. And historically, I challenge any of us here to name a prime minister that deserved a 3rd term. And if we cannot name that, I think, name one at least one name, then I think we're in some problems.
Again, I hear you, but everybody will have their political opinion. I've heard people say, and I can't make this argument because I was not around, that Eric Williams was the best prime minister for Trinidad and Tobago. I've heard that. I've heard people say the same about Patrick Manning. I've heard people say, boy, they should have really given Robinson a 2nd term, and that Bastio Pandey should have been prime minister for 15 years. I've heard all of these things being blazed out. So bear in mind, that may not necessarily be the best litmus test. But Ajay, let's go on. Let's move on to the next point about the right to recall a dysfunctional member of parliament. A member of parliament who has the title, who has all the perks and privileges associated with it, but may not necessarily be doing their job or carrying out their responsibilities as should. Now again, how is it that we go about even defining whether or not this individual is dysfunctional or not, because an individual might say, I like my member of parliament, I see them all the time, I get to, I get through to them, they help me out. And another individual might say, I haven't seen this individual for the last 5 years. In fact, the last time I saw him or saw them was when they were on my doorstep asking me to vote for them in the last election. So again, it's a good point, but how do we navigate through recalling a dysfunctional member of parliament?
See, and this is again where I think we need to look at the petitions as an option. We need to develop a system where they be a certain percentage of the electorate votes or participates in that. Because we have an EDC where one other person might have challenges with, but it's a system where they really only spring into action during elections and election seasons. So why can't we have a system where once you bring a petition, let's say the electorate in that area is 5,000. Why if we have 3,500 persons within the electoral district decides they want to recall an MP, and they come together, they sign a petition which can be verified due to their ID card numbers and so on, and that could be submitted to the EBC or the parliament. And I think that should trigger recall once you have a particular percentage of the electorate deciding that here was happening. I think it's time we need to recall this MP. And it's not only the right of recalling the MP for the vote per se or for the seat. You see, what will happen is you need to look at the psychology behind this. Being an elected MP and knowing for a fact that my people can recall me if they are disgruntled, you will have to treat with a wider cross-section of the population and not just those who are politically on your side. One. Two, you also have to be mindful now that in allocating my funds and the resources, if I don't spread it wide enough, the same people who may get knocked can also turn and say, hey, what's going on? Here in functioning, we need to switch, we need to make a change. So the psychology behind it as well is going to affect the performance of the MP. And I think we're going to get better performance because the number of these MPs focus more on working in ministries and not working in electoral districts or constituencies. So that right to recall would create a mental impact on all elected officials.
But then arguably another point that you could look at, rather than recalling a member of parliament, is if you have ministers who form part of the cabinet and then a complete separation in terms of the role of an MP and a government minister. And that is possibly where local government comes into play.
So I want to also take a bite at that question that you asked, Ajay, because we need to understand what is the role of a member of parliament first and foremost. They are to represent you at the sittings of the House. That is their job. How do they do that? They're supposed to speak to you. They're supposed to speak with you. You are supposed to see your MP. When there's a bill to be discussed or a debate to be had, they are supposed to engage you as one of their constituents. I mean, it is up to you if if you are interested or not. But you are supposed to be engaged because who they're supposed to represent? Not their views. They're supposed to represent your views. And I think that is something that citizens of this country sometimes we forget. So that's very important. I think it will allow for accountability and transparency and a check and balance with understanding your role. Also the way that they vote. The way that they vote in the House. For example, if we look at, and I want to zone in on the Tobago MPs, you had the THA. And of course, at that time, the PDP would have won the election. And so, around that time, I believe it was the Tobago bill that was being discussed in Parliament. Mm-hmm. And you heard
nobody lives there, I remember that.
Right. And you heard a number of Tobagonians, right, who were saying, well, look, we went through the consultation process and all, it didn't include nothing that we wanted. You heard Mr. Augustine and his executives speak on that. And so maybe, if that was a thing, maybe the MPs for Tobago East and Tobago West would have been forced to adopt the position of their constituents, because that would have been a litmus test that that THA election would have been a litmus test for the ground, and how I assume voters would have gone away from the PNM to, at that time, the PDP. So even it's beyond government MPs, is also opposition MPs. I mean, your job as an opposition MP is not to just oppose for opposing's sake. You're supposed to consult with your constituents and represent their views. I mean, you have MPs in the lower house that I could count on one hand how many times they debated. I mean, that is shameful.
I often actually ask how many members of the cabinet adhere to their constituency days. When was the last time you saw your member of parliament, your elected representative?
I haven't seen
Not on television. Ajay, what about you? What was the last time you saw your elected member of parliament?
You know, interestingly enough, I had the opportunity to interact with my MP just last night.
Well, that's excellent.
Just last night, I had the opportunity to actually interact with her and have conversations and so on.
Elections coming
But what I'm saying is, and in the Tobago case, it's pretty unique though, because I have had a conversation with her. She did a session a couple years back with Commonwealth, when they had Commonwealth Day in Trinidad and so on. And she was sharing with us some of the challenges of being an actual Tobagonian MP. And there are times where I have to be sympathetic towards her. Because when you look at her ministerial role and function and operating in Tobago, can you effectively run a ministry and be firmly based in Tobago? Let's look at the Tobago East MP compared to the Tobago West. So one is a minister who runs an actual ministry, and the other is a minister in the ministry of. And when you look at it, you would realize now that Miss Kajol Lewis, possibly not as yet, doesn't have children. And compared to Tobago East, who has a daughter and a son. So you look at the logistics and having to travel in between both islands very, very regularly. That would affect your family life and it would affect your performance. And in some cases, I'm also tempted to believe, this is just my humble perspective and not the views of the program, that at times they receive resistance from public servants, Trinidadian public servants in the system because of it. There are times I wonder if my MP's positions and perspectives are turned down at the cabinet level, and even so far as the ministry perspective. Because when they implement some of the programs and you hear some of the challenges coming through the pumpkin vine that they're having, sometimes you can't necessarily blame the minister as an individual. Sometimes she needs to be physically there to physically get things happening, otherwise sometimes nothing gets done.
Now, one of the arguments that you've made there has been already, I suppose, a solution that has been proposed, that has been suggested. It may not resolve anything, but it's certainly, everything, but it certainly does possibly help the situation, and that is if the Tobago House of Assembly was represented in Parliament. And that Tobago does not necessarily have two MPs, where you have Tobago West and Tobago East, but it's rather the THA that represents Tobagonians in Parliament.
I also heard a conversation about the Chief Secretary being a special member of the cabinet or something like that. Well, you see, when we start to have conversations like that, in my honest, humble view, and I'm trying to be very respectful here as well, it is because the MPs in Tobago has been ineffective in serving, or at least being able to represent the THA's view. And the only reason I think this conversation is coming up is because we have a difference of political parties. You have the PNM Tobago MPs, and of course you have the TPP THA. So I think that is, but beyond that, when you had a PNM on THA, you never really had a conversation about this, a conversation like this before.
I would like to interject here.
Go ahead.
And this is one of the areas that I found interesting. Unfortunately enough, programs will be rolling out very soon to clarify. But do you know that the Chief Secretary is allowed to attend cabinet meetings once they are discussing matters in relation to Tobago? The THA allows for it, and if I remember clearly, there is a provision in the Constitution that allows him to sit at cabinet meetings when they are discussing issues related to Tobago. However, he's not allowed to vote and participate in the voting as it pertains to those matters. But he is allowed to attend cabinet meetings. And I also have to ask here, how many persons in the Trinidadian space, or how many of the persons or the legal minds in the Trinidadian space has actually fully read the Tobago House of Assembly Act in its current state and fully examined it? Because the Chief Secretary is also required by law to meet with the Prime Minister on a regular basis. They did not state how regular, but it's supposed to be regular discussions on it. So some of the things we are discussing here now, the provisions are already there, just that we haven't implemented them or we haven't practiced them for a very long period of time.
Well, that may be down to political differences as well, and the mere fact that this THE administration is the first non-PNM administration, I believe, in 18 years. So it has a lot to do with that. But those are very good points that you've raised, Jay. So I'm going to pause on that topic now, given time. I want to move on to the issue, and I refer to an issue because Tobago fought. We argued for the CCJ headquarters to be established in TNT. In other words, the home of the CCJ is to be Trinidad and Tobago. We won that battle. But we have not adopted the CCJ as our final course of appeal. In fact, the Privy Council is very much still the one leading that charge, or that responsibility. Now, that issue has been brought up once more in terms of constitutional reform, the role of the CCJ versus the role of the Privy Council, and exactly why is it that TNT has not been able to adopt full membership. So, Ajay, I'm going to start with you on this one in particular, and countries like Barbados, Belize, Dominica, they've all made the CCJ their highest court. TNT has not done that. But why do you think we're still split? Why do you think there's so many differences over our full membership to the CCJ?
Ethan, interestingly enough, this is a topic that I have always been interested in. When I spent some time at the UWI doing my certificate program, I was tasked to write an article on this topic, and a couple of months after, the Tobago House of Assembly legislature would have granted me the opportunity to travel to the UK and to speak with some of these said law lords. And as persons who would, or law individuals would do, is you wouldn't get a direct answer from them. I think the historical record again here is what creates a problem. We don't have much trust in our legal justice system. We see it has been delayed. We see it has been heavily politically influenced. We see it as, we just generally don't have trust in the system. And when our cases go to the UK, we see a pattern where all of our courts, including the High Court in Trinidad and Tobago, cases generally tend to swing towards the state. And as soon as they leave the jurisdiction and goes up to the Privy Council, we see a lot of these cases being overturned. In some cases, they've been sent back because they're finding flaws in the judicial system and the processes. So I think having an external body make a decision on some of these issues here, we are a lot more comfortable with. We tend to accept the CCJ's ruling because of the millions of years of experience in it, simply because our governance system is based off of the Westminster system. And I personally am fully in support of the Privy Council. I think it's best to have persons who have absolutely no benefit, absolutely no influence whatsoever on how they make some of these legal decisions. And we even see that happening now with the recent case with Vibes Cartel out in Jamaica, where they see a lot of different flaws in our justice system and the legal proceedings. So I am fully in support of it remaining as is. Leave the Privy Council where it is.
And that's a very interesting point, and I say that because we've partially, to a certain extent, already abolished the Privy Council. Partially. Election matters here in TNT are heard in the Court of Appeal. That is our final course in dealing with election matters. But for everything else, there is the Privy Council. Chris, what are your thoughts on this issue?
Well, this is an interesting time again. You know, before an election, we're having a conversation like this. And I want to caution, again, both the government and the opposition, because what they say today will be reflected in time to come. And I don't think it serves well for some who are coming across like hypocrites, because some would have supported the position conveniently in office and now they opt not to. Now, should there be a referendum for this? I looked in Greendot and also St. Vincent, and they would have done, you know, a referendum surrounding this in 2009, Greendot 2016, Greendot again in 2018. And for all of those times, the population, well, the turnouts would have been interesting, would have dwindled. So the interest, so the interest would have dwindled from 55% down to 53%, sorry, down to 34%. And on each occasion, the persons who engaged in the referendum vote decided to not support. So that is something to take into consideration as well, that there are countries also that have taken a position that we have, I guess, adopted right now. Have we adopted it? Well, it is our, I assume, just a natural occurrence that it is our final court being the Privy Council. But when we say, and this is the thing, when we say about should there be a referendum for this, we have an election next year. We have an election next year.
An election doesn't necessarily equate to a referendum.
It doesn't equate,
on the CCG in particular.
It doesn't equate that. But if that is such a big national issue, then it must be at the forefront, or at least in your top 5 of your discussions if you are trying to seek the mandate of Trinbagonians, both the PNM and the UNC. And this is where the membership of both the PNM and the UNC have to put pressure on their leaders, you know, because the policies that they wish to see executed in government is going to come from this party. And so I think that referendum, I'm not against it, but I'm just saying that we have an election. An election must serve as something, because you're giving us a product and there's something to vote on. And so if this is such a big issue, well then let it be a part of your national campaign and let the population of Trinidad and Tobago have its say.
Ajay, Chris, has there been any evidence ever produced that would suggest or show any interference within the course of the CCG? I know one of the major issues, actually, just like you, when I was at university, I had to do a study. I had to study and write I suppose, an argumentative paper on the CCG. And one of the major sticking points is that the CCG has not been fully fleshed out. It's not, the complement of judges for a fully functional CCG does not exist. But there is no evidence to show that there's been interference within the court systems of that is the CCJ. At the same time, the CCJ is more Caribbean-centric and will reflect more on Caribbean society rather than the Privy Council.
I think, Ethan, I understand your position, but we also have to deal with public perception. And that's one of the biggest challenges faced throughout the region. Because yes, we know Trinidad is high on the corruption index, and it's even worse for us to accept it, knowing that the headquarters of the CCJ is based in Trinidad. And then we also have to look at how CARICOM operates and CARICOM issues. So it's a really complicated scenario to have fleshed out and to fully get an understanding of where it should go. I think what we need to consider is what should go to the CCJ and what should go to the Privy Council. If that is what we want to do, and try that as a litmus test to see how it would work. Because I am firmly of the view still that it is complicated. Let's look at the Martha S. Caesar scenario here. Let's look at the process of even the appointment of the Chief Justice, and some of the times when the Law Association and the Chief Justice are loggerheads. So if the Law Association is having challenges, and actually the head of the judiciary is at loggerheads, how can us as the regular citizens feel comfortable going to these both agencies to have our issues legally heard? Especially when it gets complicated and is high court matters. You still feel uncomfortable. Let's bring it down for the actual man on the street level. Because there is a perception that lawyers tend to come together to treat with matters. And the same what happens with judges. And then there's also a perception that lawyers and judges together cook up cases. But when a matter has to go to the Privy Council, chances for this cooking up taking place is much, much less.
I think, Ajay, I think whether the Privy Council or the CCJ exists, it doesn't matter. There's always going to be that perception within the public domain.
Yes, but we will reduce it at that level. If I don't have that option, or I feel ill-treated, having an external body, something that we always would like to have, treating with these kind of matters. And I mean, it's hard now for as a young Tobagonian to be convinced that the CCJ is the best option. And be very honest with you, it's going to take a lot to sell me on the Caribbean Court of Justice.
I think one of the arguments that one can make in respect to impartiality as well is that, wasn't it our Court of Appeal in 2007 who quashed Bastio Pandy's conviction, and not the Privy Council? But just bear all that in mind. So yes, I agree with you, Ajay. I think it's a debate, Chris. I agree with you. It's a debate where it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot more information. We have to hear all sides. Is a referendum necessary? That's my final question before we pause on this topic. Is a referendum necessary, Chris?
I would say yes, it is necessary, but, and there's a but. The but is you have an election. If it's so important to our political leaders and the political parties in this country, then make it a part of your national campaign and have citizens vote on it.
Ajay, your answer to the question whether or not a referendum is needed?
Firstly, I am still wondering if our laws, our constitution allow for a referendum. And as it pertains to this matter, I think no. No, simply because of the fact that we have elections coming on. I don't want to end up with a Brexit situation in Trinidad and Tobago, where the media, quote unquote, leans towards a particular direction, force the population technically to vote in one direction. And after a decision is made, we're now looking to flesh out the details and to work through the fine prints of it. So I really do want a Brexit scenario in Trinidad and Tobago currently. So this is why I don't think a referendum is needed.
Ajay, believe you me, my friend, when I say you and me both, we don't want that Brexit situation here in Trinidad and Tobago either. Gentlemen, let's take a break. Let's take a quick break. When we return, we're going to just quickly speak about the Tobago House of Assembly. Sorry, the Tobago Council of the People's National Movement. They're into elections which are due in just about 3 weeks' time. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll touch on that topic.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. You don't need, we can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploited the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Now, at the beginning of December last year, the Prime Minister was in Tobago speaking to the Tobago electorate, and he made let me quote directly from him now. He says, "I'm here to say to you here in Tobago, you PNM people in Tobago, our opponents must watch out whenever we are rejuvenated. Whenever the PNM is being rejuvenated, watch out. I know from personal experience that is so." That was in early December of last year. Now, in 3 weeks' time, the internal elections for the PNM Tobago Council is due. PNM are in a rebuilding phase, but Ajay, you're out in Tobago. We have not gotten much reports as per the status of the PNM Tobago Council, other than the fact that Kelvin Morris, of course, is minority leader. Ansel Dennis is currently leading the Tobago Council, and that it seems as though they're not able to pay their bills. I believe electricity to their headquarters in Tobago were recently cut. So, Ajay, what are you hearing on the ground in Tobago with respect to this situation?
Okay, well, first, I think we need to track back a little bit historically to see what happened. What we need to remember is during that whole Kelvin Charles era, when the PNM internal elections were a lot more public, it created some backlash. And I believe they are still recovering from it, not as bad as when it initially happened. And that's when we saw Kelvin Charles being hounded out of office. It left a bad taste in the mouths of all Tobagonians, not just PNM Tobagonians as well, because Mr. Charles has one of the better records. He would have established a lot of youth programs during his tenure as presiding officer, built out a lot of infrastructure exposing young persons to legislative history. And a lot of us were disgruntled by the way he was treated during that particular phase of that process. And then we saw where he got nasty internally, they begin to call each other names and so on, and the population didn't take too well to that. So I expect a lot of the internals to be held quietly, to be held with a lot of closed door processes. As it pertains to the leadership of the party, I think a lot of Tobagonians really don't want Ansel Dennis as political leader anymore, to be quite frank. You have gotten to the stage where, yes, he's political leader, so we respect his post and his position, but Mr. Morris, in our view, stands a better chance as being political leader. Mr. Larry Paul, excellent individual. I mean, a man with an impeccable character. Whether you're PNM or not, you respect Mr. Larry Paul and his positions. So from what we're seeing here, there are good persons in the PNM to take them forward, but I believe Mr. Dennis is a little bit too tainted, and as he gets closer to the elections and some of his responses and the way he treats with some of these Tobagonian matters, Tobagonians really getting irritated and we getting fed up of Mr. Dennis.
Excuse me there, but the point raised there, well, back when we were covering the elections in 2021, it's a similar thing I heard on the ground. A lot of people in Tobago, whether they were PNM or not, were not happy with how Kelvin Charles was treated. In fact, so much so that it was thought that Kelvin Charles and the way he was treated was also a factor in the outcome of the elections back in 2021. That's 1 point. 2, I tend to agree with you in this sense that why is it that Kelvin Morris, who has been leading the, not necessarily by choice but by default, leading the PNM Tobago Council, and all their arguments and representing the PNM and the opposition in Tobago Assembly, whilst we're not saying that he is not going up for the political leader of that position or that post, he has not given his intentions or signaled his intentions to channel Ansel Dennis for that position. But why wouldn't he lead the charge? He has been doing this for the last 2 years.
So, you said, and I quote, whenever the PNM is being rejuvenated, watch out, Dr. Rowley. And I think whether you agree with his governance style aside, we could debate that a different day. But Dr. Rowley politics, the last time Dr. Rowley rejuvenated would have been when he became the political leader. When the PNM at that time in 2010 would have been 29-12. They would have lost a significant ground. Some of their safe seats would have gone to the People's Partnership. And Dr. Rowley and the PNM understood then that the product that they sold to the population in 2010 did not work. And so they needed to rebrand, remarket, and get back to the drawing board, get back to the rejuvenation process. And so they did that, because what is the purpose of a political party? The purpose of the reason you exist is to win elections. The reason you exist is to get into government. And so right now what you see with the PNM is they are getting ready for an election, you know. And I don't think they're only getting ready for a THA election. I think they're also getting ready for a general election, because they know very well that the THA election was a litmus test and they didn't do too well there. So I think the political leader of the Tobago Council, I don't necessarily think it should be the person who may be the chief sec. I don't necessarily think so, because you have Tobago MPs as well. You have Tobago MPs. So the Tobago PNM Council, I think, would not just deal with Tobago affairs only with, as it relates to the THA, but also I think it relates to other issues that would come down to Parliament. Now, I want to agree with Ajay. I am confused, because I really thought, and I would have liked to seen Mr. Morris throw his hat into the ring, because you're right, he has been leading the charge. And I mean, yes, there's minority councillor, I believe is Miss Petal, but I think he has been doing a good job as a standalone minority leader.
What if Kelvin Morris has been directed to say, no, you're not going to be leader, no, we're not putting you as leader? Well, that's a possibility, because another point go ahead.
I also think, you know, recycling Ansel Dennis, knowing very well that he lost, it's not a good take. When the population votes in an election, they vote based on the political leader, and they also vote based on the party's policies and the candidates that they're offering.
Chris, he's going to make the argument to you that I didn't lose the last election. I lost my position by 3 votes. But it was really Tracy Davidson's esteem who lost that election for the PNM Tobago Council.
Well,
I mean, Chris, I want to interject here, because there's a critical factor that I think we're missing. A wounded PNM in Tobago is an extremely dangerous political organization.
A wounded PNM as a whole.
Correct.
That's the words of the Prime Minister. What he says is exactly what tends to happen on the island here. When you're wounded PNM, the PNM comes back out running. So with all we discussing, we want to discredit the words of the Prime Minister. These words that he made is not to be taken lightly as a Tobagonian who has been following politics since the age of 7. A wounded PNM is an extremely dangerous political organization.
I agree with it.
I agree with it. I made the argument that the best I've seen is when the PNM has been in opposition. Keith Rowley as opposition leader was brilliant back in 2010 to 2015.
So the PNM understands that when the population rejects you, you go back to the drawing board and you come up with a new product, and you serve that to the population come the next election. And I hope all political parties are looking on as to how the PNM, not really the governing style, and again we can debate that a different day, but we're speaking about the politics of it all. And I think there are lessons that we can all learn from the People's National Movement and how they play their politics.
So, Ajay, with respect to the Ansel Dennis leading the PNM Tobago Council, you made a point earlier on suggesting that Ansel Dennis is more or less washed out. Tobago Indians are fed up. Why would you make that comment? What is it that you've heard that suggests Tobago Indians are fed up of Ansel Dennis?
Okay, so there have been some challenges over the years. What I think Mr. Dennis fails to realize is Tobagonians may not be as vocal as, but with memory and short. So there are a number of things that would have happened during his tenureship or the rental of the Chief Secretary's chair that he probably believes the population has forgotten. But word on the ground is still discussing some of the decisions he made as Chief Secretary. And what is making it worse now is we see where this current THA administration have been releasing a number of documents, executive council minutes, should I say, of some of these decisions that were made. And every time something released, you see a live almost immediately coming from him, trying to rebut the statements. And once he makes an attempt to rebut, what the administration now is doing is they are not just releasing the documents on those matters. They would physically go to the locations and show you where this is the executive council minute number, whatever. This is the road, this is the street sign, this road was supposed to be paved in pitch. But when we look here, what are you seeing now? And we live on location. So there's a way in which now he's being discredited, not by word of mouth, not by political aspersions, if I should use that term, but you're physically seeing where the executive council minute is there, his name is there, he signs off on the projects, and we actually go to see what happens like, but this is a clear disparity. And then that immediate response is what gets people thinking, because there are times where you would accuse the Prime Minister, and he would not respond immediately. There are times where you may accuse the MPs of something, and you find where they don't react, they respond. And then you could also gauge from the response that, okay, yes, everything may not be perfect, but it makes sense or is reasonable or is rational. Or you might be able to say, well, they're allowed to make mistakes. But when everything you're getting an immediate response almost every time. You know, it's like when somebody's on edge and they irritate it, and so that is the kind of taste in Tobagonians' mouth now as it pertains to him. Why everything happening, I immediately jump to respond. Why not take some time to internalize the information, take some time to verify? And then what makes it even worse is we are seeing a clear difference. We've seen it in front of your face.
Ajay, has Kelvin Morris proven himself enough to lead the People's National Movement, or is he still needing some political maturity?
I think he can. What people underestimating Mr. Morris for is he spent a lot of time working with Miss Claudia Groom-Duke. And Miss Groom-Duke has an excellent political personality. She's one of the few politicians in the Tobago space who demitted office and is living an enjoyable private life because she wasn't necessarily a part of any corruption in any major way. The people of Swam still appreciate him. The people of that area still loves Miss Groom-Duke, and because of his connection and learning some of his politics from Miss Groom-Duke, you've seen it coming through the way he leads. So yes, he opposes, yes, he may create some challenges and so on, but there are times where you could still see him having cordial conversations with the chief. You can still see him having cordial relations with Miss Taylor, who was the person who challenged him for the seat, and Miss Taylor happened to lose the election. But that does not mean that Miss Taylor and Mr. Morris has an adversarial relationship. So his style of politics, and I think we underestimating him, and we underestimating Miss Groom-Duke's effect. And what adds insult to injury is Mr. Charles also represented that same area. And Mr. Charles does not have a bad name in the public space as well. He's also one of the politicians that is enjoying a good private life because of the way they operated while in office. So that whole electoral district of Swam, which was Blackrock, Wim, Spring Garden, that stretch before the EBC interfered with it, they enjoy leadership that's always on the ground, that's always connected, that's always relatable and builds very good relations. So he would always stand strong based on riding on the backs of those persons who he would have learned some of his politics from. What we see with Mr. Dennis is an almost carbon copy of Mr. London.
Whoa, that is...
And to be going to have that kind of irritated, because Mr. London is the longest serving chief secretary on the island, and persons are kind of irritated by it. That is why they made a change.
That is quite a comment. Chris, your thoughts on what Ajay has expressed thus far?
You know, you asked if it is Kelvin is ready. Well, he had to be ready. He had to be ready. I mean, he would have been the only. There were 15 seats, and the only PNM elected representative would have been Kelvin Morris. And I think that should count for something. And it should count for many things, at least. So I think that it may be a miscalculation as well to, put back Ansel Dennis. But of course the membership of the Tobago, the PNM Tobago party, they have the right to vote. And so they must take these things into consideration. It is not about keeping the status quo the same. It is about what is the best product that you can offer to the population come the next election. You said that Mr. Dennis may argue that, he didn't really lose, it would have been Tracy. But no, look, all they lose collectively, right? Right? And if about one street didn't come out, maybe Mr. Morris wouldn't have gotten his seat neither, right? And Miss Abby Taylor would have been the representative. But I digress, right? He would have, yes, I understand he's very young. I know that he's very young politically, and I know in the PNM they like a mix. Well, not really a mix. They like a lot of political experience. Even Dr. Rowley, when he became the political leader in the PNM, there was much infighting that happened. He still retained his seat in the 2010 election under the current, political leader at that time. So they appreciate that experience, but of course the times are changing. And so as much as Dr. Rowley is saying whenever the PNM is being rejuvenated, watch out. And I will not take those words lightly.
Never.
Not taking it lightly.
Because he's very much correct in what he's saying.
But they must also be careful that they cannot give the population a recycled product that they rejected. And as much as we will, not take these words lightly from Dr. Rowley, let us also not forget the might of Mr. Augustine.
Yes, I was about to make the point that Dr. Keith Rowley has said that. Ajay, yourself, and I agree that you cannot take those words lightly, because a wounded PNM is a very dangerous animal, and it's not meant in a disrespectful manner. It's just the fact that politically, when the PNM is rebuilding, they rebuild strong, they rebuild hard. But as much as we're taking that seriously, I wonder what the Chief Secretary, as well as the other executives within the THA, how they've interpreted this. What is their position on the words? They might just brush it off, but I don't know. Anyway, gentlemen, we come to the end of this conversation this morning. And Ajay, I'm sure you were aware, but the night that the Prime Minister made the comments about when the PNM is being rejuvenated, watch out. It was the PNM Tobago Council Awards, and Hilton Sandy as well as Kelvin Charles were awarded that night, were actually given awards that night on the part of the PNM Tobago Council. So it was kind of interesting. No love lost, perhaps, between the PNM Tobago Council and Kelvin Charles, but nevertheless, Ajay, thank you so very much for your contribution to the conversation, the debates this morning on AM Prime.
No problem. Nice being here and having the opportunity to share and give you all some on-the-ground perspective.
Always is a pleasure. Thanks so much for making the time for joining us, Chris. That's it for another edition of AM Prime Debates.
All right, well, thank you as well for having me on. I know now it's supposed to be, what the time is, 7:30. So persons are supposed to almost be at work. So I want to thank everyone for joining, even if they were listening in their car, and have a very productive Friday and a safe weekend.
And enjoy the last of very little to no traffic on the roadways. And to all the school kids, enjoy the last day of freedom. We'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
WESN.
My name is Karma Mirage. As a lifelong entrepreneur, I often share the benefit of my experience with our young innovators and small businesses. Just as I strive to guide others, our Constitution must also foster an environment for citizens to thrive. This begins with education catering to diverse learning styles and extends to establishing frameworks that support new enterprise. But are we doing enough? Constitutional reform needs your input by 15 April at constitutionalreform2024.gov.tt. It's your future, your constitution, your voice.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
Folks, we're back and better than ever.
Your show have always appeared to be a show that is focused on going to the cause or looking to the cause.
We hardly ever talk about the white-collar crime, though. We always talk about the ones that involve more as physical violence against individuals.
The citizens will only measure transmission when water starts to flow through their taps.
The Constitution doesn't talk about local election.
Contract mafia that's responsible for looting the country and they own and operate these politicians.
So if you are running a country and you can't say nothing as a prime minister, please take up your bag and go.
It is not comparative to the murder figures, but it is in fact very high.
I believe he's protecting certain individuals.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
7 is out, all day is in. WESN News on the hour.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
I suppose, an imbalance from the current perspective of the current Armenian government that it wants to redress, and obviously the European Union wants to change that as well. Ursula von der Leyen talked a lot about support from the EU to, for example, Armenian small and medium-sized enterprises, grants and so forth, which are all intended to kind of align Armenia with the EU and increase bilateral trade.
Now, Armin, what about Armenia's pivot? Does this leave it in a tight spot back in its region?
Very much in a tight spot. I mean, you can't just turn away from more than 30 years of a specific foreign policy doctrine overnight. That doesn't happen. Armenia is still a member of something called the CSTO, which is a collective security organization that is led by Russia. Armenia is in practice not working with that organization anymore because it says that it's not providing any real security for Armenia. But Armenia is very much in a gray area. So if we look at this map, to the east of Armenia, Azerbaijan, the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia is very much still far from over. It's not a hot war at the moment, but it's certainly flaring up very frequently. Then you've got Turkey to the west. That border is closed, as is the border with Azerbaijan to the east. So the only two borders that it has open are Georgia in the north and Iran in the south. And it's got these growing problems with Russia because of Armenia's pivot to the west. And now you've got the Iranian factor as well, which you have to look at, because Iran, of course, has a very difficult relationship with the West. So if Armenia gets closer to the West, does that pose a problem for Armenia's relationship with Iran? There are a lot of conundrums here. So Armenia might want to become part of the European family at one point, Will, but it can't change its neighbors, and it can't change this very difficult neighborhood and the borders that it actually has.
All right, Armin, thank you very much. Armin Georgian, our Europe editor. Search and rescue efforts continue in Taiwan after Wednesday's powerful earthquake. 9 people were freed from a cave in the mountainous east, but At least 12 people were killed in the quake, which was the strongest to hit the island in 25 years. Charlotte Hughes reports.
Amid the rocks and boulders dislodged by the earthquake, these rescue workers press ahead in their search for survivors in Taiwan's Taroko National Park. Some of those rescued nearby feared they wouldn't make it out.
We didn't realize it was an earthquake, but our mobile phones were alerting us. By the time we checked our phones, it was too late. Everything was collapsing. It felt like we were buried alive. We could not see anything in the car as it was so foggy everywhere.
Hundreds more are still stranded in the area, but according to rescuers, most are safe. At the Silks Place Hotel, where some 400 people have been cut off, helicopters have brought in supplies and evacuated some of the injured. Meanwhile, local authorities are demolishing quake-hit buildings. Dozens gave way or were damaged in the earthquake on Wednesday, forcing some locals into temporary accommodation.
I was going inside to buy breakfast when the earthquake started. I didn't know what caused the earthquake. Suddenly it got much stronger and I heard the rumbling sound of the ground. My whole body was just thrown out of the shop, but the owner pulled me back in.
Several people are known to have died and scores more have been injured in the quake, which is the biggest to hit Taiwan in 25 years.
Time now for a Scoop, our weekly conversation on the intersection of power and the media. We look at who shapes a narrative, hidden biases, explore journalistic ethics, and ask all the tough questions. It's a critical eye on a critical profession. Today we go to Haiti amid surging gang violence, a poorest country in the Western Hemisphere at risk of becoming a failed state. Over just a 3-week span last month, more than 50,000 people fled the capital Port-au-Prince amid a surge of gang violence. Insecurity making headline news in America, where the country's borders are the main issue ahead of November's election. NBC News said the future of democracy in Haiti was at a tipping point. Take a look.
Each other, then banded together, attacking airports, police stations, the presidential palace, even prisons, releasing thousands of inmates into the streets.
Sadly, Haiti is in familiar territory with turmoil. There are too many tragedies over the past 20 years, but here's a brief list: a coup d'etat, a devastating earthquake, a massive cholera outbreak, an international charity preying on the most vulnerable, committing sexual exploitation and child abuse, a presidential assassination, and then in February, these gangs carrying out a series of coordinated attacks in Port-au-Prince. The man at the center of the violence is Jimmy Cherizier, a cop turned gang leader. Critics say he has a messianic complex. A man nicknamed Barbecue has compared himself to figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Fidel Castro, and even Robin Hood. Britain's Sky News has had some of the most in-depth TV coverage of the crisis. Take a look.
Well, we're right in the heart of Barbecue's gangland territory, and I have to say the atmosphere here is very different to large parts of the rest of Port-au-Prince. It's much more chilled, much more relaxed. There's aid distribution. It's not chaotic. What the sense you get from this is that people feel safe inside here. The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. Here, this is much more like a normal town, if you like.
Cherizier's territory organized relative to the rest of Port-au-Prince, people queuing, knowing they will get food, unlike in other parts of the capital. So, is Barbecue Robin Hood or a ruthless murderer? Maybe both. Let's speak to our guest, Widler Merancourt, who writes for the Washington Post and is also the editor-in-chief of the independent Haitian news organization Ayubo Post. Widler, thank you so much for speaking to us. First of all, I'm just curious about how local media are treating Cherizier. Do they see him as part of the problem or part of the solution?
Well, overwhelmingly, most people here in Haiti consider Jimmy Cherizier for who he is. Jimmy Cherizier is a thug. Jimmy Cherizier is, a former police officer who became, a gang leader. He rose to prominence as someone who conducted different massacres. So, the vast majority of people here consider him, as a very troubled figure and not someone who's reliable on anything.
Even before this outbreak of violence, Haiti had an awful track record in regards to press safety. Last year, the Committee to Protect Journalists said Haiti was one of the countries where murdered journalists are people who murder journalists are most likely to go free. What's the situation for journalists in the capital? Are they targeted?
Well, even before, this crisis, Haiti journalists were targeted for reasons. If you publish something that someone don't like, you might get killed. We have several examples of that. The gangs would attack also journalists who publish things that, would suggest they may have information about how they conduct their businesses. And because of the impunity, when the police beat journalists, when gangs kill them, nothing happens to them. And the situation is even more difficult right now, where we have the uncertainty of who's running the country, who's the government, and gangs killing people and making life extremely difficult here.
What's ironic about journalism is it's most critical at critical times like this, Woodlore. Take us through what a day is like for you, a typical day. How do you do your job?
Well, my biggest fear, quite frankly, is for my team right here. We have about 20 to 30 people, including some who are not, inside the country, but most of our team here in Port-au-Prince. And as I said before, the story that these people are telling is our story, meaning I have teams in gang-controlled areas, I have teams in places where the gangs are operating. So that means when they start shooting, when they start displacing civil population, we have to evacuate them. In the past couple of months, we at Aibu Post had to evacuate about 7 members of our team. And, quite recently, when Jimmy Cherizier's gangs were operating in, and fighting with the police in the lower part of Delma, they, get inside the houses of civilians and ask them to keep their doors open, so much so that, if the police came, they could use the population as human shields. And we had people, in the area. I can say that now because they were evacuated, but we had teams, in the area, and it was extremely painful and stressful, quite frankly, to not know their whereabouts, to not know if they will, get out of this situation alive.
Widler, when you're looking at the way the international media is covering this crisis, is there any part of it that isn't being picked up or isn't being treated accurately?
Well, as a journalist, I hate it to tell other news organizations how to do their business. It's an extremely difficult business, and everybody needs to have their own independence. But there is, when it comes to Haiti, a couple of things happening. The first thing is there is the danger of the single story, where you have this place and people come and they don't care about complexity and depth and of this place. They hear about gang leaders and they come and go and interview gang leaders and they believe whatever the gang leader is saying, and it's believable because the single story that we've been telling about Haiti for decades is a story of turmoil, of chaos, of gang lords, and it's believable, and Haiti is not as powerful as other countries. So when a foreign media tell a story about it, they could conduct, mass movement on the internet and have the peace takedown. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think there is a tendency in our media to be interested in the lurid, to be interested in the sensationalistic way of covering the news, which is, let's take Jimmy Cherizier, for instance, right? He's a gang leader. Some experts say he's a terrorist. He is someone who's, rose to prominence because he conducted multiple massacres, brutal massacres, right? He allegedly got his name because he's known to burn down his opponent. Okay, so in the places that he operates, he had thousands of people displaced. He's attacking Bel Air.
Weidler, I'm sorry, just to cut you off. We're running out of time. I wish we had more time to discuss that. Weidler, thank you very much. Weidler Marincourt speaking to us from Port-au-Prince. That brings us to the quote of the week. It's an old Haitian Creole proverb, courir la pluie tombe lévrier, running from the rain only to fall into the river. In other words, avoiding one crisis only to stumble into another. That's it for Scoop this week. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned to France 24.
In 1971, the Bangladesh nation was born. It marked the end of a 9-month struggle for independence, which took the lives of as many as 3 million people.
My father told me that he saw during the war so much atrocities against the women and children.
Half a century later, the textile industry has given the nation a boost, but numerous natural disasters place Bangladesh at the forefront of climate change.
Back then we had fish, goats and cows and other dairy animals, but by adding more salt to the water, we lost everything.
A nation that is looking ahead, but must come to terms with its past. The birth of Bangladesh revisited on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome to Across Africa, our weekly look at stories from across the continent.
France 24 special correspondents and reporters investigate the latest events making the news in Africa. Politics.
Young people are very involved and interested in these elections.
Economics.
Such a high concentration.
Climate change.
I am proud of our generation.
Conflicts.
It's time to have a reparation.
Across Africa, what's happening across the continent? With Georgia Calvin-Smith on France 24.
Hello and welcome from me and the team. This is Around the World here on France 24. I'm Alison Sargent with your headlines this Friday. The Israeli military fires
WESN.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sira Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Engineers from Germany arrived to commence repairs to TTMS Doppler weather radar. A man sentenced to 16 years for setting his pregnant girlfriend on fire in paternity dispute. Police on the hunt for a 20-year-old suspect accused of sexually assaulting 11-year-old girl. Now for the details. The TTMS is pleased to announce that a team of highly skilled engineers from Leonardo, German radar manufacturing company, has arrived in TNT to commence repair works on the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service Doppler weather radar. This collaborative effort aims to restore the full functionality of the radar system, ensuring accurate and reliable weather forecasting capabilities for the nation. Following recent technical issues encountered by the TTMS Doppler weather radar, Minister of Public Utilities Marvin Gonzalez engaged with Leonardo, a renowned leader in radar technology solutions, to provide specialized expertise for the repair and maintenance of the radar infrastructure. The team of engineers from Leonardo brings extensive experience and technical proficiency in radar systems, equipped with the latest tools and resources necessary to diagnose and address the issues affecting the TTMS Doppler weather radar. A man named Sherwin Cattle from Malik has been sentenced to 16 years in prison for dousing his pregnant girlfriend with gasoline and setting her on fire during an argument in 2013. The altercation erupted over doubts regarding the paternity of the child. Despite the severity of the crime, Cato's sentence was reduced from 19 years due to his clean record since the incident occurred. The horrifying event unfolded at Cato's residence on June 28, 2013, leaving the victim, Melissa Williams, hospitalized for 2.5 years with third-degree burns covering 65% of her body. During her hospitalization, Williams, then 29 years old, gave birth to her baby. Additionally, she spent a portion of her time in a comatose state while receiving medical care. Authorities are on the lookout for a 20-year-old man following accusations of sexually assaulting an 11-year-old girl. According to police reports, the incident came to light around 1 p.m. on Tuesday when the alleged victim, accompanied by her 47-year-old mother, visited the San Juan police station. The girl, who had been reported missing on March 27th after failing to return home, was discovered at the residence of a man known to her in San Juan. The girl disclosed to police that she had been raped by the suspect. Subsequently, she underwent a medical examination and her statement was recorded by law enforcement officials. Efforts were made by the police to locate the suspect at his residence on Tuesday, but he was not found. WPC Charles is spearheading the ongoing investigation. Well, that's it to News on the Hour on WESN. I am Sarah Ali. Thank you for watching.
WESN.
Welcome. I am back. I wish I could say better than ever, but managing. Sure, Michael, small hair, 85% maybe, but Talking Point must still go on, so it shall be. Talking Point on WESN, the content capital in HD, and that's just part of the difference that we bring to television. Glad to be here, back, folks. Had to take a day off yesterday, but things keep on keeping on. And we don't have much time before we have to welcome our Friday contributors, so let's kick off straight into today's Daily Review. And so many topics are topics that I had to hold off since Wednesday, but they were important topics, I think, that probably are not going to necessarily get the attention that they deserve because, of course, crime and the things around crime, that's the big story. And we'll get to that when my Friday Contributor comes. But before we get there, of course, over the weekend past, a former Chief Justice and King's Counsel, did pass away. And it renewed, with De La Bastide's passing, it renewed the call for consideration of moving from the Privy Council to the Caribbean Court of Justice. And it's a topic that's been, I guess you could say, ongoing for years. Doesn't necessarily seem to ever take a solidified place on the agenda of any given administration, even though maybe there's some lip service. And then, of course, whenever there's a controversial ruling, it always comes up. Now, the recent situation is that I guess it's similar to what happened when former Prime Minister Pandey passed away, and we had now calls for constitutional reform. As an individual passes, perhaps an issue tied to them gets a little bit more of a platform, gets a little rise in importance. However, former Attorney General Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj, he's, I guess you could say, not so much put cold water on the discussion, but maybe has given us a proper starting point. And he is saying that it should be done through a national referendum. And to some extent, I think this may be, I'm not 100%, but I think this may be the best way to answer the question, is now the time that we should consider moving on from the Privy Council and using the CCJ as our final court of appeal. And this is a topic that General John Bates and I have spoken about before, so we didn't necessarily want to rehash it. But I did want to bring this up because I guess the movement could be seen as political if any political party does it, right? In fact, the opposition currently, Senator Wade Mark, speaking on behalf of the opposition, I believe, or at least on behalf of himself, he brought up the fact that he believes, and his party believes, that the CCJ is open to political influence, right? He said that, well, the current administration is prone to corrupting independent and public bodies. Although I would argue that even local judges have shown to not necessarily fall in line with the agenda of the current administration. In fact, we just had a High Court judge be criticized by the Prime Minister over his statements, well, over a ruling about FULs and the Commissioner's responsibilities, and another judge had to come out and defend his peer from the Prime Minister's remarks. So to say that the judiciary, it might be one of the few things that, even though there are questions and rumors and speculations around the Chief Justice, the individual judges, at the very least, to some extent, have shown to be independent. Industrial courts, of course, that is also kind of up in the air with regards to speculation, but nothing has been proven, or there's no reasonable argument based on rulings and precedents set by the new presidents of the Industrial Court, so we hold off on speculating that far. But then now, the senator even brought up another point in his defense. This is Senator Wade Mark again. He said that the founding father was a Privy Council supporter. And I find this argument to be a bit of a stretch, right? He was saying that Dr. Eric Williams, he had the opportunity to make the changes because he entrenched a 3/4 majority to change the Constitution. He had the majority during 62 and 76, and if he wanted to make the changes, he could have done it, but he didn't. Right? He said that they never tampered with the Privy Council. It only began under Patrick Manning. But my thing was, Dr. Eric Williams was Prime Minister. He wasn't just, a Prime Minister at any random time in TNT's history. He was, the first Prime Minister.
He was a leader of the country while it was transitioning from being a colony to being an independent country and then a republic, etc., right? That's why we call him the father of the nation. And a lot of people might dispute that or debate that about if he did good or bad for the country. But at the end of the day, the point is, chronologically speaking, he was there at the beginning. And you don't necessarily make decisions at the beginning that you would make later on after a country matures, after an entity matures. I mean, at the end of the day, when we're born, and up until the age of just before our 17th birthday in some cases, we don't drive a car because we can't. Because we're not mature enough yet to drive. Society has deemed that it is not right for us to start driving, and thus we basically don't learn to drive for the most part. Of course, some people teach their children, on private property, maybe just reverse out the driveway, something like that, fine, whatever. I didn't do that, by the way. But my point is, children don't drive cars. They're not allowed to. When they mature, they're allowed to. In the meantime, we can't say, well, because they didn't do it, technically speaking, once you reach tall enough to touch the pedals, you are physically capable of driving a car. But you don't. That means that you are pro not driving. You are pro public transportation. No, that's not the case. Babies start off eating baby food. They don't eat steak at 6 months. That doesn't mean that they're against meat. The nation was beginning. So you consider the things you have to do, and then when a nation matures, then you could consider more advanced questions. And to some extent, for small countries, part of the question is, are we ready to have our own Supreme Court? The CCJ is not the Trinidadian and Tobagonian Court of Justice. It's the Caribbean Court of Justice. It's a regional Supreme Court, which didn't exist at the time. So at the time, there were no alternatives. And I'm pretty sure at the time, Dr. Eric Williams and everybody else in power basically they only had two options: a Trinidadian Supreme Court or the Privy Council. And they decided on the Privy Council. Now, there's a new option, the CCJ. And with the creation of the CCJ, that basically gave us an opportunity to say, well, now we have a viable option, because one could argue TNT might have been too small to have its own final court. But now we've reached this point. So I don't necessarily like that argument. I find that argument is very, very, it's a big oversimplification of the situation. But at the end of the day, I am welcome to the continued discourse of the topic. Hopefully we'll get a bit more serious about it. It's fine if we stay with the Privy Council just once, let's get some real arguments for and against. Not so much this. And maybe that's why we should just have a referendum to put it to bed. All right, we take a break. We welcome our Friday contributor when we come back. Stay tuned to Talking Point on WESN.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of the
not no.
Let's go to the last part.
Coming soon to WESN.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me
you?
how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why.
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So here we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren. Coming soon to WESN.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the home store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue, St. Anne's. WESN 30A Gattaca Street, Woodbrook. Metropolitan Bookshop, Ariapita Avenue, Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
Welcome back to Talking Point, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm back after one day hiatus, but guess who's back after a couple of weeks of missing Talking Point? I think it's been a month almost. Welcome back, Janelle John Bates, to the show. Good morning, good morning.
Good morning, good morning. Thank you for the warm welcome.
I mean, I've missed you, and I will speak for all of my valued viewers. They've missed you too. Because
sweet of you to say.
I mean, it's always good to get different perspectives, and I think one of the things in TNT, and I can't remember, somebody even had a column about it. Oh, there was somebody for their tertiary education did like a report or a paper, a thesis on journalism in TNT.
Right.
And one of the things was, journalism in TNT for the most part tends to be like glorified stenographers that basically so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that in response.
Right.
Whereas being willing to give an opinion, one, and then having the good enough judgment to give a responsible opinion, two, those things are things that we should...
Are lacking.
Are lacking, and we need to keep fostering them. And I have no problem if other media houses start doing what it is we're doing. But right now, most of them aren't. So until then, we need to...
I find there's a lot of talk radio, though. There may not be a lot of opinion giving on TV.
But I don't know.
I feel like there are a lot of shows like similar to this, but on the radio.
50% of them, though, I don't know if they meet the responsible part of the equation, right? There's a lot. So I'm just giving like a guess here, right? I'm willing to guess. Half of them might be responsible, maybe, right? But I'm willing to say at least half of them. I don't know,
if they're responsible.
Because a lot of media tends to have biases. It could be commercial, it could be political, right? We don't exactly always know what they are. We assume the political a lot of the times, right? But at the end of the day, responsibility also includes, at the very least, stating your biases and trying to then, you know, give objectivity while acknowledging them, or, which is very hard, trying to be as objective as possible.
Well, I don't claim to be a journalist, so I will have to take your opinion on everything that you've just espoused.
Well, there we go. Well, now that's out of the way. One of the things, I'm actually quite surprised. Usually you like to give us, we talk about, not always, but we talk about some of the lesser known topics that are actually quite important in society, or are less spoken about aspects with regards to important topics like education and social injustice. But this is a bit more direct with regards to what's going on, and it's, for the most part, the whole concept of extrajudicial killings in TNT. And I think it's been bubbling for quite some time. There are a lot of cases where, was it or wasn't it? We just, well, last year, was it? I think we had the verdict from the triple homicide of the Moruga case.
Yes, we had the 6 police officers who were found not guilty for the 2011 murder of 3 individuals in Moruga.
I mean, look how long that was.
Exactly.
And there are other cases like the 2 accused or the 2 suspects in the Andrea Barrett case.
Yes, I completely forgot about that. So in researching this topic, that was brought to my attention, and as far as I found, there's no outcome. I couldn't find an outcome at all.
I mean, it's crazy, right? I remember the case, but to some extent, you know, it's almost like I'm reluctant to say it sometimes because I don't want to be, oh, he's harping about this thing again. But we're talking about 2 guys who died without their day in court.
Died in police custody in a very, a highly publicized case. And I actually am surprised that I forgot that 2 of them died. And I think that is one of the problems with this issue, that it's happening so frequently that it's too much to keep up with. I would want to say that I forgot about them in light of the others that you keep hearing monthly.
Is it that, and let's just talk about this general issue, I guess you could say, where these aren't small scale things we're talking about. We're not talking about, oh, there was a Rodney King moment where like one guy, he got maybe beaten and then he sued the state and he got some money and it's more or less over. We're talking about deaths. Right?
But Stuart, I think before we launch this topic, you use the term but you use the term extrajudicial killing. When I'm looking at the topic, I prefer the term police-involved murders, killings, or police-involved assaults. I think that's different. Why do you use the phrase extrajudicial killings?
The only thing I have is that it also should include at least, I would want to include it, right? I'm not saying this is a determination of guilt, but there were 2 prisoners who recently also died in custody. Now, they recently, I think yesterday or the day before, the reports came out that the recent autopsy, private autopsy, showed it was blunt force trauma. The previous case was blunt force trauma, right? Now, that doesn't necessarily give the final indicator of how they died and who exactly is responsible.
It's in line with what was said happened. There was a fracas in the prison involving prison officers and prisoners. There was, I guess, a mini riot, and a number of prisoners and police officers were injured in the incident. So the cause of that being blunt force trauma, to me, is not unusual or indicative of, I guess, guilt on the prison officer's side.
Well, in and of itself, technically it is not, because how did the trauma happen? Who caused the trauma? Blah, 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 blah. Because even the previous time I did give alternative scenarios, right? Although given the events as was told, hearsay coming from the family through their, what they heard and so on and so on. It's a bad look for the prison service, which is why we want an investigation.
So you want the broader term then? You want to say what? Official, I don't know. What is law enforcement involved incidents? Well, I don't know if you want to focus on any killings.
Why do you not like the term extrajudicial?
Because extrajudicial, to me, it has a negative spin, and it almost implies that the incident or the death was a murder versus somebody died in an incident. I would have probably shot back let's say, in self-defense.
Right.
So I don't know if I am just skewing the word extrajudicial. I must say I didn't look up the actual definition to see if I'm making a mountain out of a molehill.
No,
but I prefer...
I believe you're quite correct with the technical. Extrajudicial is an intentional killing.
Yes.
Right? So at that point, you basically we're saying state murder or murder by a state official
which
agent,
is different because police are, and I'm focusing on police here, are allowed obviously to use force and even deadly force in certain situations. There's a whole human rights approach to policing. There's, I think, even our what you call it, our the SOP. There are guidelines to how you can engage somebody in a deadly way.
Now I'll say this. I remember there was.
So once you're within the guidelines, I don't know if I like the word extrajudicial for that. It would be police involved.
Right.
And I think that's part of the problem here is that we take so long in the investigations. We don't. How is it classified in the end? For example, using the two suspects in the Andrea Barrett murder.
Yes.
Is that extrajudicial killing or was it a police involved incident? No one. Who killed them?
Well, I hate to say this, but in light that they lacked a riot in that case and in the case of the prisoner, the first prisoner that I am referring to, I can't remember exactly. The first prisoner was the suspect involved in the shooting of the deputy commissioner of prisons, right?
Yes,
now, in those cases, granted, with regards to prisons, there's always a chance that even other prisoners might have been involved, right?
The police gave their version of the story, but has it been refuted? Has it been supported? That is the problem. The version in the Andrea Barrett murder was that he fell off a chair.
Well,
that was it. He fell off a chair. And he had comorbidities. He went to the hospital. He fell off a chair.
Well, because that's the other thing. One of the things that's telling in the most recent case was the fact that at least there was one report, and I can't remember where it was, but I'm confident enough to at least bring up the point, right? Forgive me if I misquote the actual details. They were looking into the death to see if he had some sort of disease, pre-existing medical condition to explain his death, right? I think certain diseases like tuberculosis or I can't remember, meningitis or something like that, right? And to me, that at the very least, if you're looking into that, then all of a sudden I'm not really considering, well, another prisoner didn't take an opportunity to beat him in the middle of the fracas, right, or anything like that. Now, it still could have been, yes, maybe, all of the prisoners were treated the same, and he just happened to be one that died, and, they don't necessarily know what they did wrong with him as opposed to the others.
Well, I mean, in law, you have to take the victim or the individual as you find them. Is it the actual rule? So even if a person is more inclined because of, I don't know, pre-existing something to die. But once you have done something that caused the death, it really doesn't matter if they have a particular weakness in them. But the question is, did you
what
intentionally kill somebody? That's the point.
Well, in the case of, ironically,
kill or cause grievous bodily harm, I should say.
In the case of the first prisoner and the two Andrea Barrett suspects, I could see a scenario where it was intentional, right? But in this case, I actually think it probably was not intentional, right? So in that case, but would it still be, right? Would it still be a crime, I guess you could say? Well, if it was that they caused the death due to excessive force, that would still be a crime, correct?
Intention to kill or cause grievous bodily harm without any reason. If you have no excuse, if it's not self-defense, if you don't have a defense, well, then it's murder, yes. But that's the thing. As I said, I don't want to get into the details of the incident because my concern is we have the police complaints authorities, we have the regular police, we have all these systems in place now, which is an improvement because while looking at this topic, I found a 2000 Amnesty International article investigating our abuses of, this whole thing of police-involved killings. And one of the things they would have said back then is the weakness in the investigation process. They said some of the key problems in investigations into allegations of police abuse include serious shortcomings in the internal and external police complaints mechanism. This was 2000. Since then, around 2007 or so, we have had the Police Complaints Authority, and if anything, at least we have this independent body who always seem, at the time of an incident to say that they are investigating. So there's an improvement. We have been improving, at least in the investigation, but the problem is it takes too long, and then we forget, and what is the outcome?
But do we even finish most of these investigations? I guess it's not necessarily fair because a lot of the examples that we're talking about is somewhat
Fairly
recent,
yes.
right? Although the Andrea Barrett situation, how recent is that?
Yeah, no, that one.
mean, now we might be a little too long, right, in the situation.
I think one police officer was charged with misbehavior in public.
The head of the unit was removed. And, I mean, let's put it this way. From what I understand, and I suspected this to be the case, they reorganized sorts, in part because the foreign aid was pulled because America basically said, well, we can't give aid to anything that has any sort of reasonable inference to, you know, abuse of human rights, right?
Yeah,
under the Leahy law, they just, the money, it's not even an option, they have to cut it, right? And I think this is why the Prime Minister, people want to say, well, we've had veteran unions before. I'm like, hold on, think about it. He's probably not harping about this because he wants to harp about it. He's probably having to do this because if we want international partnerships to continue, they want to ensure that they're not going to be caught up with any sort of foolishness, right? So they want all the T's crossed twice and all the I's dotted twice. And I understand that because we ourselves here, this is the problem. When the cases take too long, I guess you could say,
that is one of the problems.
Doesn't it look as though that justice is not done?
Well, the phrase is said, justice delayed is justice denied. I mean, that's a trite phrase. Everybody knows this, but it's the truth. If you take 12 years for police officers to be found not guilty, and I'm not saying they're not guilty, but I'm saying it took 12 years for there to be a closure in this case. It just encourages impunity. People do whatever, and we will just wait. And now that there's bail for murder, well,
I mean, the state is suing the witness in that situation as well. That's just
I found that was a whole.
Not only did the case take too long, but then the execution of it was derailed. And just note, we don't know exactly what happened, so let's not cast blame. And I think that's
what do you mean? But what happened? I think the
no.
It was. You mean in
like the why and exactly why it is that she gave the testimony she gave. We know what testimony she gave.
Well, witnesses turning hostile is nothing new if you're involved in the criminal justice system. I mean. And this brings me to another topic. In Trinidad, we are heavily dependent on eyewitness testimony.
Yes.
Now, if we had the police wearing their body cams, we wouldn't have to depend on this officer who turned hostile, changed her whole statement, because we will have the body cams and we can just look at the video. Why it is that we are still taking so long for this to be commonplace?
In my opinion, because apparently we have batteries that only last an hour and a half, and they're supposed to be batteries.
This is impossible.
I can't remember. They're supposed to be batteries that's supposed to last 6 hours, regardless.
How is it functional in other countries? Why do we have these excuses?
At the end of the day, we have to look into that as opposed to, well, they're not working, so blah, 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 blah. I mean, that goes into issues with procurement as well as procedures, like standard operating procedures when you get new things or implement new things. And that's what the police, fire service, and other parts of the government. It's not just a police problem. But yes, because in my mind, it goes back to, if I'm a police officer, I would want a body camera because it will protect me. And now it's, again, this kind of what plays into the whole other side, that whole highly critical, cynical argument. Why the police cameras not working? Obviously, they have things to hide.
Yes.
Now, not every officer has things to hide, right? But it's hard not to at least consider that point.
It's a change. Again, I always say a lot of problems in Trinidad is a cultural change. We were very resistant to wearing seatbelts, were we not? I mean, I was a child, so I have no choice.
I honestly can't remember, but I think so.
But people were very resistant. And you know what changed them? When police started to hand out tickets like that, now you feel weird if you don't have on a seatbelt. You feel like, this is too loose. It feels unsafe somehow. Because it's been a change. So you have to enforce it seriously if you actually want change. Otherwise, people will continue doing, because we are creatures of habit. I never wear body cam before, so why now I have to study this extra equipment and making sure it charge and this, that, writing reports, all the things that flow from having a body cam.
I guess you could say it goes without saying also now with regards to prisons, something, I don't want to go into the details of what it would look like, but something similar needs to be done. CCTV cameras.
But I was going to say something like CCTV.
You know,
I think that's a normal thing in
I think
in
the problem
other
is prisoners might say, well, you have these cameras in the cells. It's a breach on our rights.
Well,
but then if we don't have it in the cells,
it doesn't have to be in the. Are there even CCTV cameras in the corridors or public
I guess,
areas?
yeah.
What about
because
public
if it's not
areas?
in the cells, then you know something bad could happen in the cell, and then.
Well, I mean, you have to balance privacy and all of that with security and safety. So there's a balance, but they should have some somewhere.
Now, before we end, because we're getting there, I actually want to go back to where I wanted to start off from, because you mentioned the fact that, you know, you kind of forgot about the two suspects' deaths.
I did.
And to some extent, I think, even the Moruga triple homicide, we forgot. It's only because the case came up, and then it was a controversial event.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's 12 years, eh?
Right.
Forgive me, 12 years ago.
But at the end of the day, people have died, and I think it's fair to say, or it's reasonable to say, I think every year at least one or two situations come up where the country has a question. Sometimes it might be a legal shooting, but sometimes it might be, well, you know, what happened.
Well, you say one or two. I just have some statistics here for the years like from 2019 to 2022. Every year it's been around 32, 33, 31 police shootings that have been investigated by PCA. I think they investigate most, so I think we could kind of garner that.
I think it's general's best practice to investigate all police shootings to some degree.
So I'm going to assume the statistics of how many that they actually investigate is an indication of how many police-involved shootings. And 33 or so a year comes down to almost 3 a month.
Yeah,
so again, there's so many. And when I was looking it up, I came across on Google, a World Population Review, country rankings, police killings by country. Now, I cannot speak to the methodology of the accumulation of this information, but it was startling to me that this website has ranked us among the top 10 countries with the highest rate of police killings. I didn't think we were that bad.
I think the key is we don't have confidence in the investigation of a lot of these cases. Sometimes might be obvious. Man pulled a gun. Because I remember there was one that we gave props to the police. He was shooting at the police, and it was next to Ryson Road. It was next to the highway. And somehow the police were able to shoot back. They handled a gunfight literally right next to traffic, and none of the uninvolved people were hurt, right? And we give them kudos for that. And then when people come and say, oh God, they kill him, they kill him. Well, yeah, but I mean, unless, I don't know, 50 people who were there were to tell me that he never drew his gun, I'm going to go with the police's version of events on this. But it's not always that obvious, right? And then you have doubt. And I do wonder.
And then also the other day, another statistics, actually a very few officers get charged with these murders.
Right.
Again, another statistics I came across here. For the period 2008 to 2018, only 11 officers were charged with the murders of 8 citizens, which is startling. If we have 33 police shootings per year, but over a 10-year period, only 8 officers were charged, I find that very low compared to the number of police shootings.
Now I lamented this when children started to be killed in the crossfire on a somewhat regular or too regular basis, right? That I didn't see public outcry. And with regards to police shootings and killings, right? Some might be legal, some might be not. But my point is it that we've just resigned ourselves to, well, the PCA doesn't really get anything done, and the Professional Standards Bureau doesn't really get anything done, and nothing ever really gets done.
Let's also make it clear that the PCA and I guess the PSB, can only refer the charge to DPP. The DPP is the one, that office is the one to say yes, charge them, or the police as a whole, they are the ones who have to charge. So I don't believe the PCA have power to charge these people. Their power is to investigate.
And they can investigate.
Right.
But to some extent, they're investigating the police on misconduct. The murder investigation, I believe, is handled by other police.
But, okay.
So
they still have their but they're just a recommending body.
But my point is, like you said, we forget. We forget about these things. Is it that we've just kind of given up? As a society, we don't necessarily have anybody advocating to improve this. You know, I'm not saying we need a lobby group with big corporate financing, but it doesn't seem to be as big of an issue that I think it should be.
Well, I don't know. I guess I would say there's so many. Every day it's a big issue. Like when you think, I was just thinking this morning, when you think you have got a handle of all the madness that seems to happen in Trinidad, you hear something new like firebombing of cars.
Yes.
That's a fairly new one to me. So I think citizens were just too...
arson has gotten out of control, I think.
And prior to arson, it was the housebreaking, and prior to, it's just maybe... It's just a lot.
And then, by the way, I didn't necessarily want to go into it, but we can't not mention it. The SSA whole situation has caused the police to look into other murders that might be, and they're agents of the state. That's why they want to limit it just to the police, you know. But at the end, we're out of time. We're out of time. We have to leave it there. Thank you for that stark reality that those statistics show. They might not be the most accurate, right? But they give us a general idea about
at least what's on the internet and what's being said about our country.
And then that's why the foreign travel advisories are what they are, amongst other things. Yes. General John Bates, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, and enjoy the rest of your day and weekend.
I will try. Folks, we take a break. When we come back, we finish up the daily review, and then, of course, afterwards, we open up the phone line. Stay tuned to talk about another BSN Content Capital.
Fellow citizens, I am Rajiv Dipti. In my business, I meet people from all walks of life. I hear their stories, from struggles to successes. The supreme law of our country that safeguards our individual rights and freedoms as we go about our daily lives is the Constitution. It was amended back in 1976, but life is different now. The Constitution can be altered through legislative reforms. So please submit your recommendations to constitutionalreform2024.gov.tt by the 15th of April. It's your future, your Constitution, your voice.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
This is 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region.
Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Hello there and welcome to AM Prime on WESN Content Capital. Before we even start this repatriation and reintegration process, we've already failed, or are we doomed to fail?
You've got to invest in the institutions that you've established to carry out those sorts of core functions.
We now get into the regional updates to give you an understanding of what's happening across our neighboring islands.
We have available a number of films that are worth showing.
So it was day one when the French Revolution started to develop the concept of universal human rights.
What happened this time is unprecedented. It's one of the largest terrorist attacks in history.
Let's welcome Carl to the program. Carl is over there, next to Seth. Hello, Carl.
Silky anteater or pygmy anteater, and we have 2 of the 3 species of anteaters right here.
I'll go back and talk about WESN. A lot to get through before the 9 o'clock break. But first, just want to mention, Central Bank did announce by the end of the year a new $100 polymer banknote. Don't necessarily want to spend too much time on it because the details of how that transition exactly is going to occur. Remember the last time when they first introduced the polymer banknote, then it turned into a whole situation of having to transfer your money, bring in your cash, and to some extent, it revealed a couple of things. That said, we'll wait for more details on how that transition is supposed to occur. Right, moving on. Still on the daily review, because there's a story I wanted to get into that is somewhat kind of adjacent to initially where I started off the show with the ongoing question of Privy Council versus CCJ, who should we go to? There was a ruling on the Privy Council on a matter about a local excavator, which I found to be extremely interesting. And I had to reread this story a couple of times because I couldn't quite follow it, because what it was saying, to some extent, flabbergasted me. I found it increasingly hard to believe, even as I continued reading it, because a business owner successfully got an appeal court's order overturned. The appeal court apparently ordered that his excavator, which was unlawfully detained by the police for 2 years, was to be returned to the state. This is the appeals court's ruling, and that order was overturned by the Privy Council. And when I just say that, it kind of doesn't make sense. It's not clicking right away. What do they mean returned to the state? Because that implies that the business owner potentially lost his case at some point. Well, he didn't necessarily lose his case for the order for the excavator to be returned. What am I speaking about? Well, Caribbean Welding Supplies had an excavator that was detained by the police for a period of time. And Justice Quinlan Williams ruled that it was an unlawful detention and ordered the state to pay $1,328,320, representing the value or sale price of the excavator, and $150,000 in damages and costs, right? So then, because of that, the Court of Appeal held that it had jurisdiction, this is our Court of Appeal, to order Caribbean Welding Supplies to return the excavator to the state since it received special damages for its value. Remember, the $1,300,000+ was the value or sale price of the excavator. And the Privy Council, so CWS took it to the Privy Council, and the Privy Council said, well, there's no legal basis to order that the excavator be actually given to the state. The appellant owner was entitled to possession of the excavator. The state did not own and was not entitled to its possession. And I find it very, the Court of Appeal, this is the Privy Council, said that the Court of Appeal wrongly categorized the award of special damages as being an award of value rather as an award for the depreciation in value of the excavator. The Court of Appeal overlooked that it is primarily an action for the return of goods. CWS, by its property rights, was entitled to the return and to retain the excavator no matter how badly damaged it was. So, and again, they conclude that the Court of Appeal did not have jurisdiction to order the appellant to deliver the excavator to the state. It is a hell of a case because essentially the state, in this case specifically, I believe it was the police, was found to be wrong. And now the Court of Appeal stepped in and said, well, since we paid for the excavator, we own it. When technically that wasn't any ruling. And the Privy Council had to said, no. And I hate to say this, but I think this case is very much an example, well, to some extent, it's an example to the point, one of the points that Senator Wade Mark was trying to make, in that, you know, do we trust local judges? And I hate to say this, but I think it depends. It's not that I don't trust local judges. We get what I think to be good rulings all the time. I'm not a judge, I'm not a lawyer, My opinion matters very little with regards to if a ruling is good or not, right? Just saying my opinion. But to have such a ruling from the Privy Council does not bode well from our Court of Appeal. Now, that's not the CCJ. But to some extent, one of the benefits of the Privy Council is it is in a jurisdiction that is significantly larger even than, to some extent, the jurisdiction that the CCJ holds over. Because I don't believe the entirety of the Caribbean, right, is under the CCJ. I could be wrong about that. But the scale that the Privy Council has to treat with law makes it to some extent better practice. At the end of the day, we will never have all the specialists in medicine, right, and in various fields that you would find in a bigger country. That's why you still go abroad. In fact, even in America, you could be on the West Coast, you go to the East Coast to see a specialist, right? California has the 10th largest economy in the world, I think, something like that, or it's within the top 10. They don't have everything. So economies of scale matter, and ironically, even with regards to rulings, to some extent, they might just matter. And this might be a good check and balance on our local judicial system. Because while they are from a different culture and at times might not get the nuances of our own culture, and that could be seen in a ruling that we might perceive to be negative, it also means that there's less likely of a chance that they're going to be victim of local biases. It's a foreign bias. That's the issue. But then to some extent, when we have local biases and foreign biases, we potentially get a more robust system, potentially. Although, in reality, with the foreign biases being at the final Court of Appeal, it doesn't always wake up quite that way. So I found this very interesting, and I also found this very disturbing that to some extent, I'm not saying this is the intention, but governments unintentionally at times cause private citizens and private interests to be treated unfairly. Let's just put it that way. And I find this to be very unfortunate that the Court of Appeal thought, oh, this is what we're going to do. What was the basis for doing it? I'm not going to go through all of the cases. I don't necessarily understand what their thought process was. But I do wonder if, to some extent, we need to do a little bit more maturing before we could completely, cut the umbilical cord. Maybe I'm wrong. You could call in at the end of the show, well, towards the end of the show, last half an hour, to tell me if you disagree. All right, let's move over now. There's another story that I wanted to get through since Tuesday. And I found this very interesting. The Minister of Foreign Affairs has made an announcement to say that the ministry will soon undertake a public campaign to advise groups seeking to travel abroad, engaging in different types of activities. And this comes after a somewhat worrying trend in the words of Chief Sec, but we stay on the minister for now, right? And Minister Brown made these comments after a group of 100 children and 55 adults were unable to pay for their accommodation when they went to Manchester, England, right? He made this statement, and I think it's very important to make note of this. While many of our citizens at home and abroad are working hard every day to uplift the image of our beautiful nation, there are some who go out of their way to tarnish the national profile, either willfully or due to sheer negligence. And it sounds harsh, but at the end of the day, to some extent, that's the result. So I can't necessarily fault the minister for saying that, because he didn't say it's only intentional. He said it could also be due to negligence or ignorance. Ignorance not in the disparaging use of the word, but ignorance in the literal meaning of the word, unaware of important knowledge or information or procedures or details, and then you end up in trouble. And he has said we have seen a pattern emerging of large groups that venture overseas in the absence of proper planning and confirmed arrangements. So they're looking now to have an advisory campaign, which to some extent I find to be both I'm thankful for it, but I also find it to be a little bit ridiculous that we have people engaging in travel, and I understand you don't always know what you don't know, but to some extent, this is not going to Tobago. And even then, we underestimate our responsibilities of just flying to the sister isle when it comes to dealing with the air bridge and the abuse we give the counters for Caribbean Airlines, the agents. Yes, not all agents have good customer service, but still, that doesn't give you carte blanche to mistreat them or to act entitled. And then, of course, there's also entitlement when you get there of how you treat the staff of the local establishments, whether it's restaurants and bars, hotels, etc. But this is international travel. You're not in your country, you're in someone else's country, right? And taking it for granted that you'll figure it out. Listen, I was part of a religious organization. We might have said God will make a way, but it's not as though we literally just hopped on a plane and hoped for the best, right? And to some extent, I find it interesting that they got through with international travel and got into a foreign country, and their plans, I don't know, aren't there supposed to be some kind of checks and balances on what the travel plans are, so that you don't end up to being an illegal immigrant looking to just disappear into the nether if you don't have concrete travel plans. But I mean, I'm not an immigration officer of a foreign country, so I don't know, right? And that led to the chief secretary of the THA having to speak on this, because to be fair, he was somewhat directly involved. I believe it was a group from Tobago, and they're looking at the THA to essentially bail them out. And this isn't the first time, because there was also the situation that caused the current and then head of the PDP, then deputy chief secretary, to take issue with the THA in a very poor, what seemed to be a very poor understanding of proper legal procedure for the disbursement of public funds. That's with regards to the Roxborough dancers and Watson Duke and his tiff with the THA that led to the split, of which I haven't seen anything to cause me to throw any blame on the chief secretary or his administration in that situation. And the chief secretary had to come out and basically said that he's concerned about this trend. And he said that the THA will be forced to make tough decisions in the future to put an end to this practice. And I can't fault him for saying that at all, because if you keep showing leniency, mercy, generosity to individuals who don't put their proper planning in place beforehand, then people are going to continue doing it if you continue to bail them out. To some extent, it is a different aspect of freeness. And I don't necessarily like government freeness, giveaways and grants and etc., that don't have proper checks and balances in place, proper due diligence, etc., good intentions, and because you're going to get bad faith actors. And it's not to say that these groups are bad faith actors, but there's a lot of gray area, right? And then on top of that, I would say that the chief sec does have to consider when someone now looks at the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities and the complacency of the situation and then acts in bad faith. And if he keeps going and keeps reinforcing the precedent, then at some point it's going to be hard to stop it without the court saying, well, why you want to stop it with this group? Why didn't stop it from the beginning? So now he's seeing the trend, and it's right to call it out to try to nip this in the bud. Because even if we could have afforded, even if we had all the oil money from the early 2000s and the 2010s and early 2010s, etc., this should not be allowed. If you can't find sponsors, if you can't find and get proper accommodation plans in place, you're going for an event, plan ahead. If you can't get proper accommodation, this is not like going on Great Fed weekend to Tobago, where you go on standby and then you go and hope to find a room. And there are people who do that, and it frustrates people in the hospitality industry in Trinidad and Tobago. But that's TNT, that's still within our borders. You're going abroad and you're doing these things. That is irresponsible. I can't fault the minister's remarks about how it makes us look, especially if this trend is allowed to actually be a long-standing trend to continue and to grow. So I have no problem if the Chief Sec and the Minister of Foreign Affairs and other government bodies basically say, no more, cut, 100% complete. You go abroad on your own without putting things in place beforehand with us. We're not responsible for you. I have no issue with this. None whatsoever. Now the question is, will we be able to hold up these things? Because you can't negotiate with situations like this. If you allow it for one, you have to allow it for all. And it's not right because it's taxpayers' money at the end of the day that's being used to finance someone's individual trip. Yes, it might be a cultural exchange. Yes, there might be cultural ambassadors, but it's a private venture, not a government venture. And that's the difference. If it's a government undertaking, well then fine. They don't finance it enough, that's their problem. If it's a private venture and you don't sort things out yourself properly, that's a you problem. Break for news. When we return, we open the phone lines. We'll be right back.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sira Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Engineers from Germany arrived to commence repairs to TTMS Doppler weather radar. A man sentenced to 16 years for setting his pregnant girlfriend on fire in paternity dispute. Police on the hunt for a 20-year-old suspect accused of sexually assaulting 11-year-old girl. Now for the details. The TTMS is pleased to announce that a team of highly skilled engineers from Leonardo, German radar manufacturing company, has arrived in TNT to commence repair works on the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service Doppler weather radar. This collaborative effort aims to restore the full functionality of the radar system, ensuring accurate and reliable weather forecasting capabilities for the nation. Following recent technical issues encountered by the TTMS Doppler weather radar, Minister of Public Utilities Marvin Gonzalez engaged with Leonardo, a renowned leader in radar technology solutions, to provide specialized expertise for the repair and maintenance of the radar infrastructure. The team of engineers from Leonardo brings extensive experience and technical proficiency in radar systems, equipped with the latest tools and resources necessary to diagnose and address the issues affecting the TTMS Doppler weather radar. A man named Sherwin Caddo from Malik has been sentenced to 16 years in prison for dousing his pregnant girlfriend with gasoline and setting her on fire during an argument in 2013. The altercation erupted over doubts regarding the paternity of the child. Despite the severity of the crime, Caddo's sentence was reduced from 19 years due to his clean record since the incident occurred. The horrifying event unfolded at Caddo's residence on June 28, 2013, leaving the victim, Melissa Williams, hospitalized for 2.5 years with third-degree burns covering 65% of her body. During her hospitalization, Williams, then 29 years old, gave birth to her baby. Additionally, she spent a portion of her time in a comatose state while receiving medical care. Authorities are on the lookout for a 20-year-old man following accusations of sexually assaulting an 11-year-old girl. According to police reports, the incident came to light around 1 p.m. on Tuesday when the alleged victim, accompanied by her 47-year-old mother, visited the San Juan police station. The girl, who had been reported missing on March 27th after failing to return home, was discovered at the residence of a man known to her in San Juan. The girl disclosed to police that she had been raped by the suspect. Subsequently, she underwent a medical examination and her statement was recorded by law enforcement officials. Efforts were made by the police to locate the suspect at his residence on Tuesday, but he was not found. WPC Charles is spearheading the ongoing investigation. Well, that's it to News on the Hour on WESN. I am Sarah Ali. Thank you for watching.
My name is Kama Mirage. As a lifelong entrepreneur, I often share the benefit of my experience with our young innovators and small businesses. Just as I strive to guide others, our Constitution must also foster an environment for citizens to thrive. This begins with education catering to diverse learning styles and extends to establishing frameworks that support new enterprise. But are we doing enough? Constitutional reform needs your input by 15 April at constitutionalreform2024.gov.tt. It's your future, your constitution, your voice.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
And we're back here and talking about WESN, the Content Capital. Show Michael Small here. We had Janelle John Bates speaking about law enforcement agents, killings involving law enforcement agents. She didn't necessarily want to use the term extrajudicial. I myself am a bit more comfortable using the term. The general idea, of course, was the whole concept of people dying to agents of the state in dubious means, not necessarily declared to be illegal. An interesting topic, because we do have to understand that even if we want to say that a prisoner died in custody and it was murder, now the question is who? We can't just paint the entire prison service with a broad brush that they all are evil and foul, right? That's not how justice works. It's a complex situation, and unfortunately, I think a lot of us, we kind of don't really want to talk about it too much because we don't know what we could do about it. We have our first caller in line from Diego Martin. Good morning, caller. You on here? Caller, good morning.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, Mr. Small.
Morning, morning.
Excellent topics that you basically went over this morning, and I want to focus on two. And the first one is the Tobago contingent, sport contingents that gone to the had gone to the UK and looking for funding for accommodation. I have a different slant on that.
Okay.
I believe that that was child abuse. You can't take little kids and to somewhere that you're not too sure where they're going to stay. And you had the boat danger mixed in, and we have issues with him. So I think the Children's Authority and the police should intervene and do a proper investigation. Now, I'm going to connect that to when we locked out the 33 people during the COVID in Barbados.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, as soon as we called for lockdown, we locked them out, they couldn't come back in. Did we, as a country, pick up their cost for staying in hotels because they were coming back to Trinidad, and all of a sudden they exposed no place to stay, and I think under the Barbados leadership, they might have taken up the tab to put them into a hotel. So likewise, we have to be fair, because these people were warned, make sure you have all your ducks in a row before you go. The first set went without they had taken the advice of the THA, and then a second set went to meet them. So it appears to me it was a holiday extravaganza. Now, the other quick thing I want to talk about is what you alluded to with respect to the CCA and the competency of our judges, where you were focusing on the appeal court with that. Before we even consider that, you know what metrics I would like to see? I would like to see how much cases was overturned in the Privy Council that our appeal court made. So that is a good metric to see, to benchmark the competency. Now, before we even think of moving away from the Privy Council, we have to address how we treat the feedstock for becoming judges. The LATT has a critical role to play with that, and the choice of choosing judges to sit on our benches. And after all of that is done, yes, I'm in favor for the CCJ, but in order to go to the CCJ, we have to be comfortable with the judges. We have too many time judges has to be recusing themselves because they are in conflict or they know somebody and things like that. And the quickest way to basically go to the CCJ, and we have constitutional reform now, is to move election petition appeals from our appeal court and put that into the CCJ. That is what Guyana did a couple of years ago, 10, 15 years ago. Put it there because there's a lot of question marks with the judgment that comes down from the election appeals. The EBC has been questioned a number of times. They were wrong, but their decision was let to go. And that is my thought on it.
Caller, well, I'm sorry, we'll have to end there. I will respond to you, particularly to the first and second points that you made, but we have another caller from Digger Martin waiting on the line. Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Hello.
Morning, caller.
Am I on?
Caller, you on the air? Go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
I don't know whether Sean is hearing me.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I want to comment very briefly on what Sean said about the recent decision of the Privy Council dealing with a matter coming from the Court of Appeal in Trinidad. Okay? The Privy Council reversed the decision of the Court of Appeal in the matter to which he referred. I'm a layman, but I did take the opportunity of reading the judgment, and I was, how should I put it, I found the decision of the Court of Appeal strange, weird, almost perverse. And the Privy Council reversed the decision and used their normal diplomatic language, which formed part of their judgment. I also looked at the video of the proceedings at the Privy Council during the actual hearing, and the comments made by the justices of the Privy Council on the decision of the Court of Appeal, I would say, was not as diplomatic as the language they use in the judgment, and I would just leave it like that. But interestingly, if you were to read the judgment, the facts of the case are extensively stated, and there are two comments I want to make about that. The facts manifest the total inefficiency and incompetence of the police service during the period of time that they had the excavator, piece of machinery, in their possession, an extremely long period of time. And it's only around the time that legal action was taken by the owner of the excavator to have the item returned that the police eventually delivered the excavator back to the person. So you have to ask the question, if they were serious in terms of the conduct of the investigations, why did it take so long? I think they had it for a period of over 2 years. That's the first point. The second point I would make is, when the matter got to the stage of litigation, the conduct of the Attorney General in this matter, or the Attorney General's offices in this matter, was no better than the conduct of the police. Inefficiency and incompetence. And again, that will be obvious to you if you were to read the judgment in full. Okay, turning to the CCJ versus the Privy Council and which way we should be going. Just let me say that I have confidence in the justices of the CCJ as presently obtained. I believe that they are just as good as the justices in any other appeal court in the common law jurisdiction in the world. I'm satisfied that this is the case. However, what concerns me, and if I'm wrong on this, perhaps I could be corrected, I believe that the CCJ is an institution of CARICOM, and it comes under the CARICOM governance structure. And frankly, this is the thing that worries me, because if I were to look back at CARICOM over the last 50 years, I would find it hard to find any tangible achievement of CARICOM over that period. Mm-hmm. And when I say tangible achievement, I am not talking about talk shops. Mm-hmm. And that is my main concern. Should we have an appeal court structure falling under the overall governance of CARICOM, which in my opinion has miserably failed over the last 50 years? And I give you the most recent example of that failure. CARICOM has been talking about this thing called the Common Market and Economy strategy for well over a decade. And can anyone point me to any positive step so far taken to achieve that strategy?
Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. That's a very interesting point there, and I'll just say this. I think most bodies, like CARICOM, like the EU, we haven't seen real success from them yet. That doesn't mean that they're a bad idea, but then, of course, your fears on the CCJ, I think, are valid. I'll comment more on what you said and, of course, what the other previous caller said, but we first have a caller from Maruga, is it? Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Hello, yes.
Morning.
Yeah. This thing with the CCJ and the London court.
Yeah.
It's only about 5 people a year could access the London court because they have no money. Ask the good lady. It's about $3 million to get a case to the CCJ. So they're only protecting the people who could afford to do that. The people who, if you want justice, you can't even pay the phone fare. I mean the airfare or to stay in a hotel for and pay a Queen's Council or a King Council over there. So what is the sense of the Privy Council?
Yeah.
Anybody could walk from anywhere, go Henry Street and lodge the appeal. But in England, look at the people who go to the CCJ. The case taking 20 years. They die first before you hear they get some redress. So the Privy Council is a waste of time, in my view.
Thank you, caller. And you're right. When we talked about this topic with Janelle months ago, I think it was sometime last year, that was one of the things, the accessibility of the Privy Council, particularly from those with financial constraints. I understand that. However, and I think with that under consideration, I do wonder if there's a way to have a hybrid system where we use both. But the case that I pointed out as an example was not necessarily a criminal case per se. I think it reached the point where it was a civil case over the ownership of the excavator. But let me, although it was interesting that it was the Court of Appeal as part of an appeals process in a different matter, and so it goes back to what some of the other callers said. Because the caller just now, from the second caller from the Martin, he pointed out, he found that the case was weird. And it's right. When I initially read the case, I actually thought that they awarded the excavator back to the state, and I was like, well, that's a hell of a thing. Because of maybe it was some technicality, right? The state basically paid for the excavator so far. But no, then the ruling was, no, it was a Uno reverse. And the fact that the appeals court did it, I mean, I was already thinking this is a weird case to begin with. But the whole thing was so weird, it took me a while to realize exactly what happened. No. It went back and forth, essentially. The legal status of this excavator went back and forth. Unfortunately for the owner, they had the financial resources to go to the Privy Council to get this matter settled. It's not as though it was settled rather quickly. It took quite some time, and it probably took quite a bit of expense. Now, one could say, well, with the damages awarded, they could have afforded it, you know, to some extent you could say that. And it was weird that it even happened, and it took the Privy Council to fix it. But let's not forget, and I tried to make this point earlier, the appeal court's ruling in this matter was weird. And that might bring up questions about our Court of Appeal and our local Trinbagonian judges. But the CCJ is not limited to Trinbagonian judges. So the CCJ does not necessarily to the extent of the Privy Council, but there is some insulation. There is some lack of local bias, right? It might be regional bias, but it might be foreign bias. But my point is, we don't necessarily have the baggage of that local justices might bring. But is it removed enough, right? But it's separate. We can't say, well, how many rulings have been overturned by the Privy Council, and does it make the Court of Appeal look bad? Then we go to the CCJ. But we're not talking about the Court of Appeal. The CCJ is a separate entity. That's what I want to make. We have a caller from San Juan. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Hello, morning, Sean.
Morning.
Yeah. Sean, my only problem with the CCJ, if we adopt the CCJ as the final arbiter, the final Court of Appeal.
Yes.
Well, therein goes our big quest to enforce the death penalty, because as far as I could recall, Sean, the Caribbean Court of Justice, the CCJ, say that they are not a hanging court, for want of a better term. That is how they describe themselves. So people who, in the light of the high incidence or escalating crime situation in this country, and people clamoring for the return of the death penalty, well, there goes the death penalty, because if the CCJ could describe themselves, they are not a hanging court. Well, because the Privy Council still carries out the death penalty. You know, all the Privy Council said, according to the Pratt and Morgan case, your matter must be heard within a 5-year period. Mm-hmm. So people going around with the notion that the law lords in London, the Privy Council, say no hanging, but they never said so. But even with the Privy Council, this government is not obeying the law. I keep saying that. When you are convicted of murder in a high court, the penalty for that is death. Mm-hmm. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why the government of the day, I'm not into the political thing, whether PNM or UNC or NAR or whoever, why is the government of the day not carrying out the law of the land? Why are they not enforcing the death penalty? The death penalty, sure, never went anywhere. It remains on the statute books. But as I said in closing, Sean, yes. My concern, if we adopt the CCJ as the final Court of Appeal, well, all those people who clamoring for the death penalty, well, that has gone through the window. Thank you, Sean, for giving me this opportunity. Be safe. Thanks again. I'll list the response off here.
Thank you, caller. The main thing is accountability. The judicial system is way too slow. Way too slow. Look, we had an arson murder case that took 11 years. 11 years, right? Triple homicide, 13 years, etc., etc. And that is part of the problem. It doesn't take this long in Jamaica. And we're not talking about the United States with Trinidad and Tobago. We're talking about pair. But we have to go on a sunny line. Good morning, caller.
Good day, Sean.
Morning.
What is going on in Tobago where these people getting stranded all over the place is because Tobago was created, at least as a local government authority, against the principles of local government autonomy in Trinidad. local government in Trinidad was created to do the basic infrastructure. And the only people who could afford to raise that money to do the basic infrastructure, not everything, the basic infrastructure, picking up rubbish and maintaining drains and roads and that, were given local autonomy then. It was at the city of Port of Spain, Arima, and San Fernando originally. And then government started to interfere with it and make places like Point Fortin for political purposes where there was no attempt to deal with it. Now, they went and they create the Tobago House of Assembly with greater powers than the city of Port of Spain. And with no obligation to raise any revenue. So they get in the bulk of the revenue that they don't raise, so they give it away. It's not the first time they do that. Do you know anything like that in Trinidad going on? You may have a competition and somebody may win and get it, but anybody who have 4 or 5 members in Tobago, it looks like, could apply for Tobago funding and get it.
No, well, caller, the Chief Secretary is not looking to give out money. He's looking to put a stop to giving out money.
I'm not talking about what he's trying to do. I'm talking about why they created it.
Okay,
Fair
enough, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And you might be quite right. I am not necessarily knowledgeable over if there was previously a trend of the THA being very generous with public funds for cultural groups and performance groups and sports groups and any other independent group going abroad, and they would give away, essentially money without too many checks and balances. Of course, it could be partially a political patronage thing. That's one of the other issues with freeness, right? And to some extent, if it was that there was a bit of a culture there, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there could not be similar, parallel happening in Trinidad through various ministries, etc., but we're just talking about Tobago. It could be a situation like Chief Sec met, and this could be one of the good points about someone who is politically new, a neophyte. It's not part of the system. Yes, they have an experience, but that also means, the lack of experience also means they're not involved with the baggage of those who have been there for 5, 10, 20 years. That's one of the issues we have with Parliament. So many people, you look at them and it's hard not to make assumptions of their character with regards to their future performance because we have so much of their past performance as an indicator. The TPP doesn't quite have that as much as others, right? And yes, I think if what I understand the professor's point is being made, that an expectation and an entitlement has been built up in our society, and I think it's not just limited to Tobago, to some extent it's throughout the country, where freeness happens in various ways, at various levels, for various objectives, and at the end of the day, it placates the citizens. Except now, the PNM is the unfortunate ones who are caught with their hand in the cookie jar, but the cookie jar doesn't have that much cookies in it. They're caught with the ones holding the bag, and the bag is not as big as it was. The money bags are getting smaller. The issues, however, are getting larger. One of the things that I might touch on next week that I didn't have a time to is with regards to the fact that I find there's a lot of arson happening, and at the same time we have questions about fire service procurement. And let's not forget what Janelle was speaking about. We're talking about extrajudicial killings, but we couldn't not bring up the fact of police procurement with regards to equipment that could help deal with transparency over extrajudicial killings. So the problems are getting bigger. The problems are getting more varied and demanding a much more flexible response, a faster response, and at times even much more resources to respond. And then now we have to deal with the entitlement of our citizens. But we have to realize that at some point nothing is too big to fail. And the government doesn't owe any of us anything at some point, because the money that the government has is supposed to be for the good of all, not for the good of few, And at some point, the lines between a politician giving away money for his own purposes and a group feeling entitled to money for their own purposes, they start to not matter as much, because to the interest of the public, it is money that is being spent on something that does not help to advance society or to ensure the rights of the people and to improve the lives of the most of the society that can be with the resources available. Not everybody is going to be happy with government decisions, but it's about doing the most good for the most people. Subjective, unfortunately, but that's the reality. And therein lies the first caller's point that I haven't necessarily spoken to, but I thought this was brilliant to some extent. And it goes back to some of the other topics we were saying. Minors are part of that trip. It's 100 minors, I believe, and 55 adults. And to what extent now is at least one of those adults, because somebody made the decision to go, and they are supposed to have proper guardianship of those minors under their care and have a duty of care. And yes, I think your caller was right. We have to ask the question, to what extent? Because I think at the very least it needs to be investigated. Is this now child abuse? Is this now a crime? Or at least negligence? At the very least, negligence. And I would caution all the parents involved. One of my friends, he scoped out everything to do with a police youth club, summer camp, right? And then they had a Tobago excursion. He made sure to check every detail he could, to cross his T's and dot his I's, to cross his I's and dot his T's even, with regards to that trip. And it's just going to Tobago. The accommodations, how much it's going to cost, what they're going to do, who's in charge. And of course, he kept an eye out on the camp itself while it was happening in Trinidad to make note of how they're handling the kids, how responsible they are. And he was happy with just about everything. Parents need to, I mean, we had the ASP talk about this before, right? I guess no one necessarily thought it would apply to something like this, but the ASP warned about, at least with summer camps and vacation camps, to do your due diligence on the people who you are entrusting your children to. Now, on an international trip, you mean to tell me that the parents of 100 children let their kids go without an itinerary? Think about it. Now, granted, some of the parents might have been part of the 55 adults, but still. And I'm not saying that the parents should be condemned. I'm just saying it should be investigated. Like I said about the extrajudicial situations. It should be investigated so we can know what's going on. Especially, and this is where public funds now, you want public funds to cover up a situation where there might be negligence on taking care of 100 children. Well, now the state has a responsibility to look into this matter, because you're asking for money, right? You've involved the state. And it's the lack of accountability. That's why it needs to be investigated, and if necessarily, those found negligent to be punished, because they need to be held accountable. Just like with the judicial system, no one is holding it accountable, hence why things take so long, and the death penalty caller, we can't institute it just because we take too long. The police service and body cams, no one is being held accountable. That's why it's not working. The fire service and their wooden ladders, the fire service and their lack of breathing apparatuses, and I'll get into this next week probably. Who's holding them to account? The Coast Guard and Maritime Border Security, the prison service and their duty of care. Who's holding them into account? Politicians. And to that one, we have to look to you, the viewer, the voters. You have to do your part to make today and tomorrow better, and that includes holding politicians to account. But we can only do so if we try, as Red Curls always says. Despite all the pessimism, we still believe in TNT. We still believe in the Republic. Thanks to all our callers. Thanks to General John Bates. We will see you next week. Stay safe. Goodbye.
WESN.